Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Ramani here. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this very special event. I want to give you some context on what this event is about. So it's not me and David Kessler speaking right now in real time. This is an event we did for his community last Saturday. David has a very, very large community that comes together to specifically talk about grief in all of its forms. I found it to be one of the more impactful interviews I had ever done. It dug into, probably because it dug into the core of what makes managing narcissistic abuse the most difficult, which is the grief. The questions were fantastic. The conversation was great. David's a dear, dear friend of mine. And so much so that I thought, I want everyone else to be able to see this. So for those of you who aren't in David Kessler's community, but really focused on wanting to heal from narcissistic abuse, you know grief is probably the greatest barrier to this. So today we're going to share this as a live stream so you can all watch it together. I'm going to say a couple of things about it though. Throughout this program, I want you to post questions, okay? Go ahead, post questions. My team is going to be grabbing them up because we're going to be doing a question answer at the end. So if your question, let's say you're listening to something, question comes up for you, keep posting those questions because my team can grab them, put them aside. That's the beauty of this platform. And then we can put them up during the Q&A session. Obviously, you can also ask them during the Q&A session too. Your questions don't have to just be about grief. I have no doubt that today's program is not just about grief in general. It's specifically about the grief raised by what happens in narcissistic relationships. Okay. Now, what's so great for me, this is something we don't ever really get to do. I'm not doing this live with him. So it's going to put me in a position where while the conversation's going on, I'm going to also be able to sort of share comments about sort of even develop the thought further in a way you almost can, almost like a little thought bubble over my head. I'll be able to insert those thought bubbles into the chat today too, which is actually going to sort of be a chance for you to see some of my observations as it's going on and hopefully sort of deepen your understanding of all of this, right? So whatever my insights are this late hour, despite my fact, I think my brain is starting to turn to mush. But again, I want you to, this is also, we're doing a question and answer on the back end of this, not just limited to grief. But I think, again, of all the many things, and I've done so many interviews in the last few months and have coming out now all at the same time. This was a very, very interesting, special one. And since this wasn't like a podcast that got released to everyone, we wanted to make sure we had the opportunity to share this with communities that might not ordinarily get it, namely people who aren't with David Kessler's community. And you know what? I also feel like I've become like a late night Ginsu knife salesperson, which anyone who grew up when I did, you know what I'm talking about. Like, if you get this, you could buy this, you could buy this. So we're coming into the end of pushing you to buy this book the way we have. You have been patient beyond patient. So one thing I do want to mention though, is all the usual, if you have already ordered the book, and you've already filled out our link, you're getting all the access to that stuff, the giveaways, you know that already. All right. What I want to talk about is a new incentive. We're launching today. Some of you have already seen it on Instagram, but we launched it today and it'll expire tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. It's sort of a fun one. I think it's actually, I wish I had one with me. I didn't bring one upstairs, but, here's what we're going to get. Yesterday, we did our live book event. One thing that happened was I had this beautiful opportunity and I was having these conversations with people, I think 5 minutes, 7 minutes. So here's what we're going to be raffling off. And this is a raffle. So all that needs to happen is we've got your we see that you've submitted your pre-order. I'll say about more of that in a minute. But one of the big things that came up is that people kept saying, I wish we could have had a longer conversation. Like, I don't get just ask you one thing, just wanted to get sort of a reality check or something like that. But there were many people there, so I couldn't do that. So what we're going to do, and something I haven't done before and probably won't be able to do it again just because of time constraints, is that we're going to sort of do a sort of tea with Dr. Ramani thing. You know, I love my tea, right? And what that's going to be is virtual tea with Dr. Ramani, because I can't be everywhere, but the virtual tea with Dr. Ramani will entail, basically, we're going to raffle away 30 Zoom calls with me, basically tea with Dr. Ramani. Keep in mind, this is not therapy. It is not going to imply that I'll keep talking with you. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of time. Mostly my practice is limited at this point, but it is going to be, again, tea with Dr. Ramani. Imagine we ran into each other in an airport, at a cafe, and a 30-minute chat with me. We're going to be, like I said, we're going to be raffling off 20 of those tea with Dr. Ramani sorts of opportunities, if you will. Okay. We're also gonna, in this raffle, we're gonna mix things up a little. I know a lot of you saw those book boxes, which I should have brought one upstairs with me so I could have shared it. I'll bring one at the end. But those book boxes, we're gonna raffle off a bunch of those, and we're also gonna raffle off signed copies of the books that would be signed to you. So if you're a raffle winner, we'll let you know and say, hey, you're one of the winners of the signed book. It's going to be lots of different prizes. No one's going to get all of them. Some of you might win the tea with Dr. Ramani. Some of you might win the signed book. Some of you might win an influencer box, but there's going to be lots of chances to win. Now, those of you who have already filled out our pre-order form, you've already got your entry in. That's automatically a raffle entry. The more chances the more, if you haven't done this, you haven't ordered the book, you haven't got, and it has to be the hard copy or the ebook. But if you haven't ordered the book yet, this is it. All the incentives, not only the free stuff, but even the entering the raffle for one of those prizes I talked about, that is going to, that will end tomorrow. So if you're ever going to order, and if you've already ordered and thought, I'd love for my sister to read this book, I'd love for my friend to read this book, this is a great time to get those stocked up. Every time you order, each of those becomes another raffle entry. So if you ordered 4, that's 4 raffle entries. I hope that makes sense. My team will be in the chat throughout this to answer your questions, but this is it. Listen, virtual tea with me, be kind of fun. And so, you know what it's going to look like and all of that. So I love it. I love talking with survivors so much. I wish I had the time to talk with everyone. I understand the limits, but 20 of you will have that opportunity if you win this raffle. So hope that all makes sense. Again, ask questions throughout this program. I will revisit this at the end too, and I will be popping in constantly during this program to give my thoughts in the chat. I hope you enjoy this. I think it was an amazing conversation. David Kessler is one of the wisest people when it comes to grief, and actually a very wise counselor. So let's go ahead and turn that on, and I hope you again enjoyed this program.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Kessler. Welcome to this session. I'm here with my dear friend, Dr. Ramani. Good morning.
Hi, how are you, David? Good morning. Good morning on a Saturday.
I know. Thank you for taking time to do this. I so wanted to do this. First of all, I as a grief expert, we encounter so many nuances. People think like grief is about a death, and that's it. There's so much more to grief. And I have this amazing person that I've been getting to know, who I knew had a new book coming out. And here's the thing. I got to tell you, and then I want to dive in so much. I get in one of the pre-copies of the book, you got a chapter on grief and narcissism. Like, wait a minute. How amazing. So that's what we're talking about today, grief and narcissism. For those of you who don't know Dr. Ramani, she's a professor emeritus at California State University, amazing person. You've seen her. And here's the thing, and this brings me to my first question. You are, I believe, the foremost expert on narcissism in the world. Please, there has to be an origin story to that.
I wish the origin story was more like sort of lightning, because like this terrible thing happened to me and I was going to discover it. That was it's interesting how late that revelation was in the story. Frankly, David, I was a new professor, and I was working on a research study. Had students who were going out to like clinics around Los Angeles, and some of them would come back and they looked like they had been to battle when they came back. And I sat down, what's up? And they said, some of these people, Dr. Ramani, they're so mean. They're mean to me. They're mean to the nurses. They're mean to the doctors. And I could see how depleted they were. And I sat with that for a minute and I thought, my guess is that these mean people, and David, you might remember this term from days of yore of cluster B, but these are people who are antagonistic. They're difficult, they're demanding, they're entitled, they expect everyone to stop just for them, all of that. And I thought this is so interesting. In that particular area, I was like, I wonder how. And I was working in the area of HIV research at the time too. So I thought, I wonder how this is showing up in terms of how these folks are getting healthcare. That started a research area, which all my mentors said, don't do it, don't do it. This personality stuff, it's too messy. I said, nah, I think there's something here. And there was something there. But at the same time, and this is where I'm saying the universe sort of tells us things. At the same time, in my private practice, person after person after person was describing a similar relationship. It was often a marriage or a long-term committed relationship, but sometimes it was with a parent, sometimes it was with their adult child, sometimes it was with a family member. And they were chronically being invalidated. They were always confused. They would blame themselves for what was clearly not something they did. Like the other person was insulting them, and I was watching the patient literally blame themselves. And I would almost give them a reality check. I said, wait a minute, wait a minute. I said, either I'm in the twilight zone or I'm mishearing this. And that moment when I'd say, this is not your responsibility. I mean, it was like the lights went on, right? And then we'd start to work. And I thought there's a parallel process here. I was focusing because when I did that early research, I was focusing on the patients, wreaking havoc on the physicians. I wasn't working with the physicians, but now I was seeing who was on the other side of this.
Right.
And then, David, when I went and started talking to mental health practitioners, they were like, no, no, no. Like everyone has their thing. Sometimes, relationships are all difficult. I said, this isn't difficult. This is someone blaming someone for something. And then I realized, whoa, this is going to be an uphill climb. And that's how I got going. And it was only after all of that, I was noticing these patterns in some very significant people in my life. And I thought, oh my goodness. And that's how I got into this. And actually what keeps me in the game, as often keeps so many of us in the game, is anger. I think we do things, we love them, but it was the anger that really got me going because I saw so many clients being invalidated in therapy, being told, did you communicate right? Well, maybe both of you have shared responsibility. Don't be estranged from your family. That's terrible. And these people who are in these relationships were being shamed over and over again after being harmed in the relationship over and over again. I said, not on my watch. This has to be addressed. And that is my origin story.
And I love and people can feel your mission to help. We were talking about that yesterday. We can feel the mission to help in you. And here's the thing for me. Many of you know this. You may have not heard this side. I often talk about my mother dying when I was young, when I was 13, and it changed the trajectory, and there could have been a better death, and the grief could have been handled. And it really put me on this path to find healing for myself and others. What I don't often talk about, and I didn't understand this, is it was a gigantic loss as a mother would be. The first clue was when I was 18, 19, I would go back and visit the family. And after I became an adult, they would say things like, in a strange way, you're turning out better because she died. And I would go, wait, how can anything be better because someone died? And they would tell me stories of, yes, she was the loving person. And we didn't use the word, but they were describing the self-centeredness.
Oh.
And so it was interesting for me to think about that. Now, at that point, I thought it was all behind me. Wow, okay, what a mixed message, that it's heartbreaking that someone died, and there could be benefit to it that they didn't wreak damage. It was a hard thing to deal with. And then I thought, okay, and that's behind me. And then I noticed patterns in my life. I am going for the charismatic, amazing friends, romantic relationships. I am there. And one of the things I had to learn in the strangest way is it was familiar. It was familiar. But here's the thing, not only was the charisma bigger than life familiar, but it was the not being seen. And it's like, why would I choose relationships with people who don't see me? And so I realized, oh my gosh, this goes on and on and on, right? So I guess with that beginning, we always hear, oh, there's a continuum. I have to have some healthy narcissism to do this work. You do too. There's a continuum of narcissism we hear, but where does it step to it becoming destructive? And here's the last thing I'm going to say, and then I want to hear from you on all this. So many of my friends who also deal with narcissistic friends, family members, spouses, say, I'm doing it differently. I'm trying. I'm going to communicate better. I'm going to do it right. Da, da, da. And we're all stressing, and we're going to get to when the narcissist dies and all that in a moment. But we're stressing to do it right, which is why I love your title. It's not you. You're never going to do it right.
Nope. Nope.
No. Tell me,
No.
what's a narcissist that's the destructive person that's
okay? I have so many things to say. Can I go backwards to hit all
Yeah,
those
yeah,
points?
yeah, yeah,
I feel like
please.
I'm a vacuum. I'm like going to grab all that stuff, then I'm going to come to your question. I wrote it
Okay.
down so I don't
Great.
forget. Okay. I want to start with your mom's story, right? Because even how you were approached by that, you're better off. Like this is better off for your growth and all that.
Right. Like
Right
you would have
there.
been more screwed up had she
Right. Okay. But you were still going through a very real grief, David, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And that already that lack of attunement by the people around you. This is why I tell people, person doesn't come into my office and I roll up to him and say, hey, yeah, your husband's a narcissist. Absolutely not. Because I know that a person, many of us at some level even do love the narcissistic people in our lives. So when people come at us between the eyes and say, hey, this person's a bad person, it actually sometimes leads us to double down on justifying the narcissistic person's behavior. So as a clinician, I have to say, and as a human being, when somebody's telling me their story of their relationship or I'm seeing something, I'm not going to just say, you're better off without them. Or if somebody got divorced by a narcissist, I'm never going to say that. I'll say, this is really hard and confusing. Let's unpack it because this is a story that evolves within you. So wrong approach by the family. Okay. And then it's interesting. You said, why did I choose partners who didn't see me? You didn't choose partners who didn't see you. You chose charismatic people. All of us choose charismatic people, David. Nobody goes out there saying, hey, who in the bar doesn't see me? Who here is not a, oh,
Right.
you're ignoring me? You're my guy. Nobody does that, right? We choose people who are charming, attractive, charismatic, who almost feel like they're even a little bit out of reach, but like we're excited by them. It takes a minute to get to the don't see me part, but by then we've been indoctrinated into their system. We've either been love bombed, we've idealized them, but we're already now in a complicated system. So when they start not seeing us, we're trying to make sense of their behavior on the basis of the good stuff. So I would
Okay,
say,
wait.
right? Does that make sense?
Wait, this just hit me. So it is like I wasn't attracted to people who didn't see me. Now that I think about it, they were great at super
Bingo.
seeing me.
That's my point.
And then
That's
it
my
shifts.
point. Yep. And it shifts. And listen, this is why some people listening to this right now said, I had a narcissistic parent who I felt terribly unseen by. You didn't pick the parent, but you will watch how your narcissistic parent worked a room. Right? They would be able to, like, they saw everyone. In fact, I very distinctly remember working with a client saying, my parents saw the neighbors' kids more than they saw, like they witnessed them. And so they're so charming that they can, make people feel so comfortable that everyone feels seen by them. But if they're your parent, you're like, then it's got to be me because they're noticing everyone else. So if they're not seeing me, then there must be something wrong with me. And we keep trying to be more so we can be seen. But once they register that you're what we call narcissistic supply, a source of praise or admiration, or just that you're sticking around, then they're going to take you for granted. So we don't choose them because they don't see us. We choose them from actually very normal places. All of us are attracted to them. That's how we all got backed into this mess. And then you said another thing I also want to call out, which is healthy narcissism. I don't like the word. Okay. I don't like the word. And I'll tell you why. By definition, narcissism's not healthy because it's this bucket. And in this bucket are things like entitlement and grandiosity and arrogance and the need for admiration, but there's also lack of empathy. And the lack of empathy is almost a requirement for a narcissistic person. And while I do know that being unempathic can make us super efficient because we don't have to worry about anyone, we don't have to think about anyone, and we don't have to load ourselves down with their feelings, but I don't think that's ever healthy. So I think that what happens is when people say healthy narcissism, I say, you know what? I think you might mean assertiveness. Occasionally we're a little selfish and say, hey, you know what? This weekend I'm going to sleep in, I'm going to take care of me. So I can't maybe take you to the airport or something, where ordinarily we would. Now that friend at that moment might think we're selfish, but we're not narcissistic. We've explained it. We've given them sufficient notice. So I think that what happens, we confuse sometimes that willingness to self-advocate, to stand up for ourselves. That's not narcissism. That's healthy self-advocacy. The narcissisms, I actually don't ever think it's healthy. I think because of that lack of empathy and that willingness to manipulate and use other people, some people will say narcissistic people are tactical and they're strategic and that's the way the world works. I actually don't think that's the way the world works. Human connection is the core of all healing. And if anything interrupts that human connection, then by definition, as far as I'm concerned, it's not healthy. So that,
And
right?
you and I literally met at a conference where we're speaking for thousands of people.
Mhm.
When we're speaking for thousands of people and I go, oh, we have to have a little healthy narcissism for this, you would just say, no, David, you're just a good speaker. That's it.
And you care deeply and you want to help people. Because when I watch you speak, David, and just I want to give everyone a little bit of backstory on David, just like a little bit of David trivia here. I was a professor for 22 years at California State University, Los Angeles. And since the beginning of my teaching, I taught David's work on meaning and purpose as part of grief, because I would teach heavily about grief in my health psychology class, my clinical psychology classes, all of that. And so to me, like talking about David was like talking about like a rock star, And so the fact that I'm on this Zoom, I'm still always a little swoony when I talk about David. But when I go to conferences, I'm like, oh my gosh, David Kessler speaking. I'm going to go to, I'm going to go even if I have to sneak into the back of the room for a minute. But David, you and I speak at conferences, and I say this as a natural introvert. Any day of the week, lock me in a room, and I'm at probably my very best. But I speak in front of groups because you speak in front of groups because you know how much grief is not addressed in an adequate and full way by clinicians, and how often clients at this most vulnerable moment of their lives and the most human moment of their lives actually don't feel supported in therapy. And you've made this your life's work. Your work on meaning and purpose in grief took this model and stopped the road from ending at acceptance and said, there's something beyond this. Like this makes me more in my life. Like this doesn't have to just end at sort of like this kind of like hard stop of acceptance. It changed that entire vocabulary. Now, for me, same thing. I mean, I get in front of a room. I sort of, I'm waving my book up in the front of the room and I'm doing it. However, it's not about narcissism. If you know me, you've been at those conferences. Where's Dr. Ramani? She's in her hotel room again because she's hiding from everyone.
And
She
literally,
doesn't want
one
to
more
be
piece
seen.
of trivia. When we met, literally, we were at a function and there was a little table in the back corner of the room that I'm like, I'm going to go in the back. And you were there in the back too. So it's funny. We were both in the back.
Mhm.
Now,
But I want to go to your
here.
last question, David.
Oh,
Where
please,
does
go
it
ahead.
become destructive? I
Yes,
have all
great.
your questions here because that's what the
Great.
question you asked is, where does it become destructive? Okay. And so narcissism is on a continuum. And at the mild end of narcissism, you have almost like what I call like Instagram narcissists. These are people who take pictures of their breakfast. They think this is incredibly compelling. They're very self-referential. They're very emotionally shallow and hollow and superficial. And that's who they are always. I'll tell you this, if you had a parent like this who only cared about appearances, it was always about them, help me pick out my outfit. And meanwhile, you're a little kid and you actually need something from them. And they're more concerned about how they look in their dress going out of the house. That's actually a really, really difficult experience. Absolutely. And one would say, well, it's different than getting physically abused. I get that, but it's still hollowing out. If you're in a long-term committed relationship with someone like this, it's really hard because they're often not going to hold up their side in terms of chores or helping with children. They're just too concerned with sort of, aren't I important and aren't I great? But that's still mild. At the extreme end of the spectrum of narcissism, we're talking about malignant narcissism. We're talking about people who who will manipulate and exploit and coerce and menace people, and they're dangerous. And sometimes these relationships do have physical violence present in them, but they definitely have psychological violence and abuse. Those folks are having a very different relationship than the person who's obsessed with their abs on Instagram. These are characteristically different relationships, but neither relationship feels good. It's Not You is interesting because it focuses on the ones in the middle, which is where most people are. Most people aren't sort of locked up in a room with a checkbook, though some are. And most people aren't just dealing with the sort of the hollow, vapid stuff. They're really dealing with daily manipulation. It's sort of death by 1,000 cuts. These are our parents. These are our friends. These are our spouses and partners and all of that. It gets destructive as far as I'm concerned when it starts harming other people. And here's where narcissism is interesting. Nothing else in mental health really acts like this. Maybe addiction a little bit, but still addiction's a disease. I don't like the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder. I don't think it gets us anything. I don't think most clinicians issue it. I think the vast majority of people out in the world who are narcissistic, we don't even know if they have NPD because they're never going to go to a therapist's office. Everyone around the narcissist ends up in therapy, but somehow the narcissistic person never ends up in therapy as they wreak havoc.
Big clue. Big
Right?
clue.
Right, right. But the issue to keep in mind is that the narcissistic person not only doesn't think there's anything wrong with them, they actually think they're a nice person. Many narcissistic persons, people walk around saying, I'm so generous, I'm so warm. They actually think they're empathic, which leaves people even more gaslighted and confused, saying, wait a minute, if that's nice, then I'm definitely not nice because I'm not that. And so it's this very, very confusing space. But narcissism's one of these patterns that may actually do more harm to the people around them than it might do to themselves. Now, that's not to say that the narcissistic person doesn't have a really sort of tortured interior, but they're not in touch with that. Whereas everyone around them does have a tortured interior, they're in touch with because they're ruminating about the hurts and the wounds and the pain. So I think that when this goes beyond mere, look at my breakfast, look at my abs, let's talk about me, which is still, it's annoying. I don't think annoying is harmful or destructive, but when it's leaving people feeling like they're on their back foot, you wonder, am I a bad person? When we ruminate, when we literally ask ourselves, am I crazy? Then to me, that's destructive. And that's to me where it registers.
So there's something there, and then I want to dive into the grief part of this even more. But here's the thing I want to say that took me by surprise. With those individuals in my world, and I have many of them, the way they can shine their light on you, that you can feel so seen. They also, and I don't know what word you would say, they also, when they are shining their bright light on you and it feels so great, they also can have a super empathetic, they're really there for me in this moment. But there's something about it that doesn't last and isn't solid like it is in other people around us.
Well,
Like, I know you're going to be always empathetic. I know that. Where with them, it's like, oh, it can turn.
Because it's hollow, it's shallow. And above all else, David, it's performative and it's transactional. Okay.
Ooh, transactional is big.
So it's the empathy becomes a quid pro quo. It becomes like, well, I listened to you that day, so it's very clear that they're putting money in the bank, or it's often performative. They will be effusively empathic if there's an audience around. If they know other people are going to hear about it. So it feels not good, right? Because empathy is a very natural energy in us to want to connect with other people. It's an incredibly healthy part of us. It gets unhealthy if we're overextending ourselves and knocking ourselves out and not taking care of ourselves, especially in a person who's in a lot of narcissistic, invalidating relationships. They get into that reversal where it's lots of empathy out and nothing's coming back in. And that's when you see sort of emotional burnout and exhaustion, which happens very commonly for survivors of narcissistic relationships. So that performative, transactional empathy is very characteristic of narcissistic people, but it confuses people, especially especially early on in a relationship, because it looks like empathy and it feels like empathy and it kind of even smells like empathy. But you're right, David, you don't feel held. You feel as though like, you kind of almost feel a little icky afterwards. Like,
It
what
sometimes
was
felt
that?
like a little drug, like I got
Yeah.
an amazing
Yeah.
hit that
But
crashed.
it doesn't feel good. And I mean, that's what I hear over and over again from people. And some people even feel a sense of shame afterwards, like, ew, like, why did I fall for that? You didn't, you begin, I always am telling people you were played, right? It's like getting mad at yourself for, falling for a hustle. The onus, the responsibility, the anger needs to be at the hustler for doing the hustle, not at us for being hustled. I am so tired of people blaming people for saying like, well, why did you fall for that? Or you should have seen it. No, you shouldn't have, because you went into a human relationship expecting goodness. Let's put the responsibility where it belongs, which is on the person who's willing to engage in this kind of abuse.
Yeah. So in my groups, grief groups, tender hearts, the online groups, here's what I get all the time, and I'd love you to address it. I have this sister, brother, spouse, whoever it may be, best friend. I mean, they were always a little self-centered. They were always a bit narcissistic. And then my spouse died, my child died, and I knew they were going to finally show up. And then they crash and they go, David, I'm confused. They're making my spouse's death, they're making mom's death about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I do?
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I think this is so resonant for a community that is walking through the process of healing from grief. Because I have a feeling this has happened to many, many people, in the sense you're going through, I mean, an incredibly human experience, but a really destabilizing experience of significant loss, right? And then the people, and this is again, this doesn't just apply to grief, David. It even applies to other things. Like, I've worked with clients who've gotten severe medical diagnoses, stage 3 cancer or other progressive illnesses that are irreversible, and that they know their quality of life is going to change. And in these cases, they believe that those selfish, so, sort of they soft pedal that, these selfish people around them, now they're going to come around. This is a real moment. And until life really happened, then they're going to come around. And they don't. And either they said, like you said, like either they make the grief about them, how they feel. They'll tell you a story of a loss they've experienced. You're thinking, I don't care about your loss right now, right? But you're so overwhelmed. So you're not going to have that vocabulary, right? Grief changes us. It changes our inner landscape. You obviously know far more than me. So we don't have our usual kinds of responses. We even have lost a lot of our fight in the early stages of grief, right? We're so bowled down. So you're looking around and you feel like you've walked into the matrix. You're like, what? You're telling me what? Like, huh? And this, to me, it's again, where I've seen this much more in a much more pronounced way. I've seen exactly what you're talking about. People saying, oh my gosh, I talked about the loss of my mother. And this literally became, one woman was telling me how she had her mother, and she loved, she cared about her mother. And her spouse made it about, okay, well, let's see, like, let's make sure if we're going to go for the funeral, we stay in that really nice hotel. I don't want to stay in that dump this time. And you're thinking, and she's thinking, you're worried about travel plans right now. Like, I'm not, my heart has been taken away, right? So that expectation that a narcissistic person will show up for you is actually, for many people, the penny drop moment. That's the moment when they realize, I've put up with their sort of eternal adolescence. I've put up with their tantrums. I've put up with their selfishness. I've put up with their constant need to be the center of attention, with their little digs. I put up with that for years. And this was the moment. This was the moment I thought they would show up. And at that moment, they didn't. And the grief now that person's already going through, because they've experienced a massive loss, now turns into a literally seismic event, because now they're grieving that this person who they believed in, that they thought would be there for them, that they loved, that they put so much of themselves into, this person isn't showing up. And that combination, that synergy of those two aspects of grief, can take grief and turn it really complicated, really fast, because this what do we need when we're grieving? We need to be held. We need to be we need people to not leave us, to not be scared of us, to just be with our pain so it can run its way through. And like I said, David, the variant on this is when people really receive horrific news, like being very ill. You have a cancer diagnosis. Narcissistic people don't like sick people. They will make it about them. They'll say, oh, and let me guess, these chemo appointments are during the day, right? So exactly who's supposed to take you? Or like, oh my gosh, does this mean I have to cancel that golf weekend? They will say this stuff out loud. And so you're going through the processing of this horrific news, whatever it may be. And the person you thought would be your person is nowhere to be seen. And I've seen people who said, I believe they're, when I get sick, that they are finally going to show up. They believe that, right? And then they don't. And these are people who are now left scrambling, having to find caregivers and rides and help. And that only magnifies the grief we feel when we receive a terrifying health diagnosis, or when we're trying to navigate a significant loss. So this happens all the time. And after a 40-year marriage, 50-year marriage, you think this is your person, they've got you. And at the only time you needed them, they didn't show up. It's horrifying.
And here's what I see happening. Most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, and I try to help people understand, we were trained, we were imprinted, we're not bad. I mean, it's the premise of your whole book, but it is this sense of, they hear me say that, or we talk about it in the grief group and all that, and at a certain point, they still think I'm going to my sister, my best friend, who's making it about her. They don't quite understand the grief of my spouse dying. They don't quite understand the grief of my child dying. And they double down. They still think there's a way they're going to get the person to see their pain. And I have to say, sometimes gently, sometimes lovingly, sometimes assertively, I have to say, it's like looking for milk in a hardware store. You're going to try everything. I get it. I just want to tell you, find people who get your grief, because that person is staying in character.
Yeah, well, they're seeing a character, and I think that actually, sometimes you actually can get milk at Home Depot. So even Home Depot's got it all
Okay,
over
there we go. There we
narcissism,
see.
okay? So it's a but the thing with narcissism, right? And we all have personalities. You have a personality, I have a personality. Everyone who's listening today has a personality, right? And they tend to be quite stable. Now, the healthier the personality, the more flexible it is. We can adapt to a variety of situations. It's almost like if you're in good shape, your body's flexible. If you're in good mental shape, your psyche is flexible, right? And people who've been through long-term narcissistic relationships are ridiculously adaptable, because you've been having to adapt to the selfishness and the manipulation of this other person for years. That's why, like I said, if I'm going to go like on the Amazing Race or on some trek, I want survivors of narcissistic abuse with me, because I know you all will be willing to eat out of cans and sleep on the ground, and you'll be cool. Like, that's one thing I see. There's a sort of they're not rigid. Now, on the other side, these personality styles like narcissism are called antagonistic. They're very rigid. And above all else, they don't change. Why don't they change? Because people who are narcissistic have very little self-awareness. They have very little what we call self-reflective capacity. They don't have that ability to go inward and think about how they affect other people, which is a core part of empathy. So when it comes down to it, you have to swallow the bitter pill, which is they actually really don't care. But the worst part is they think they do.
We got to go here. This is hard. And then I'm going to get to eventually when the narcissist dies, but I want to get here. We really think we can be the one to fix them, change them. And we think we're going to get them in therapy with us, or in the grief group with us, or whatever with us. And if I've learned anything, it's they don't change. And it's so hard to realize, as we've been trained that it's about them, to understand, and you've talked about, it's like, it becomes a nasty word, radical acceptance, that we've got to, like, it is them. This is always going to be them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you started at such an important point that we will be the one to change them. So what happens is when they don't change, then it's our fault. We didn't do the things we needed to do. And I'm to tell you, folks, if you want to be perfect in a narcissistic relationship, it's actually very simple. It's so simple. You live in their service and you learn to read their mind. And if you can do that, then you've cracked the code. And I would hate to think that someone would have sacrificed their life in that way. But yet, many people spend a lifetime literally trying to anticipate it, as though if you anticipate their every need, their every want, you avoid the topics, you walk on the eggshells, you make yourself so tiny that you don't exist, so you're not a competition, and they won't be nervous around you, and you won't make them feel bad about themselves. You have to make yourself tiny, tiny, so they can be big, big. If you do all of that, this relationship kind of, sort of might work. But that's not okay. That's a complete dehumanization of another human. I'm never going to get behind that. So no, you can't change them. And we feel then that maybe we didn't love them enough. Like when these are big, heavy relationships, David, parents, partners, heavy people in our lives, and we feel like we couldn't do the things to bring them around, our tendency is to blame ourselves. And the work I do is to say, this is a them thing. And you know what? If they have the capacity to be charming at the dinner party and charming on the golf course or charming at the work meeting or at the PTA meeting or whatever, if they have that capacity, then they have the damn capacity to get into a car and drive to a therapist's office and figure it out. Because if they're oh so functional in the world, meanwhile, our hearts are breaking, they can take that responsibility. So this idea of maybe they don't know, don't tell me they don't know, because they're willing to get to know someone if they want to do a business deal with them, or if they want to have a one night stand with them. They're willing to do all kinds of deep dives then, but they're not willing to do it, even though you're telling them at the top of your lungs, I feel hurt. That's the piece where this is not you.
And I just want to, since we said it, I just want to acknowledge this piece of grief. And some folks said it. When you hear, oh, this is really them forever and ever, they're really not changing. There is a sadness to that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sadness. We thought it would be better someday. And I think there's a huge sadness to that, just to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, just like in my case, so many times it comes up, what happens when you have this complicated relationship with a narcissist? Maybe you didn't have quite the awareness you might have loved to have had. You're getting it more now, but you never sort of got to figure a little bit of you versus them out. You were so enmeshed. You were there for them, and they died.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so many times people will say to me, you don't understand. I have no purpose now that mom has died, now that loved one has died. And I'm like, there's no life ahead of me. There's no reason to live. And they're not suicidal, but it's like, wait a minute, you're 40 years old. There is a life ahead of you. But so tell us about that kind of, the narcissist dies. We didn't get to work through any of it.
So there's a couple of things that happen here, right? So if a person, at the time the narcissistic person in their life dies, and they still don't understand narcissism, it can be many of the things you're talking about, right? There's such of what we call a trauma bonded relationship. The trauma bonded relationship is a relationship that's created through sort of this false hope and this alternation between good and bad, because there's a good thing sprinkled in there. Even if the good thing is that you feel like you belong to something, or that they actually smiled at you for a minute in the morning and said good morning. I'm not saying these are extravagant good days, right? But it alternates, and then it's bad. So you use the good days to rationalize the bad days. And it creates this almost unbreakable kind of bond, so much so that people will say, the idea of stepping away from this relationship fills me with a sense of panic. And yet intellectually, you're able to articulate, like, I know there's stuff here that's not cool, but I can't imagine walking away from this, right? And you keep fighting about the same things with them, and you justify their behavior, and you can't even really fully always even articulate why you're in the relationship, right? So when people are there, they're trauma bonded, but they don't understand narcissism, and then the narcissistic person dies. What you've got to remember is that the narcissistic person, the only way I can describe it is that they're like a computer virus that gets in and infects the hard drive, which is your central nervous system. And you ruminate about them, and you think you can be different for them, and you think you can be better, and you blame yourself. So they take up a lot of real estate in your mind. You're always thinking about how you can be better, or thinking about what you can do for them, or you're thinking about the argument you had, or you're thinking about what they'll be like when you get home. So should they pass, there's a lot of empty space in there now. And for a long time, these relationships almost become something to do, right? They fill up our time, and almost like a child, especially when it's a parent, we think, I'm finally going to win them over. This is the day they're going to recognize that drawing I've put in front of their face.
And our
right?
worth was fueling them.
Exactly. And our worth was also linked into that. Now, that's what's happened. That can happen all the time when you don't understand what narcissism is, right? This is why it's so important to get it. Getting it doesn't mean you're leaving. Getting it doesn't mean they're going to be nice to you.
Right.
Getting it is simply getting it so you understand the mechanics. Now, David, there's sort of a B side to this record. And
Yeah.
what happens there is when people go through the rather uncomfortable experience that they feel that they're actually relieved that the narcissistic person has died. And it's very, very uncomfortable. It definitely doesn't go in with sort of the cultural system we're in to walk around saying, well, I'm glad she's gone. Now my life can begin. It's considered, not appropriate unless it's very, very clear to everyone involved that this was a harmful person. If it was that clear, you probably wouldn't have a relationship with them. But there's many people who will say, many people in the family were still invested in this being a decent person. They were harming me. Some folks who will have the narcissistic person die, they've disconnected from the relationship already. Some people are sort of still in it. And I will tell you, my therapy office is probably one of the first places they'll stop and say, this is the only place I can stay this safely. I am so relieved. And in many of these cases, in fact, I have a vignette in the book about exactly this issue, about when a woman had lost her husband. And I'll sort of leave it to you to get the book and read it and learn about it. But it was really what happened to her in the wake of that was quite extraordinary. And yet it also brings up a lot of guilt. It brings up a lot of confusion. And many people will say, I feel relieved. I must be a bad person. So it can really reinforce that sense of self-blame. Obviously, then, if you're in therapy, that can be a place to unpack that. But for people who are having to manage that on their own, it can be really, really challenging. And so we have grief rituals. We're supposed to show up in a certain way in the wake of grief. So when part of what you're feeling is you're sort of like, this is a relief. My life is I'm not going to have to deal with this anymore. I don't have to deal with the guilt of not going to see them. And now there's a C side to this record. So let's call it a triangular record at this
And listen,
point.
just on the seaside real quick, before we get there, I just want to highlight this point. Once I realize, and maybe don't realize, I'm in grief, my mom, my dad was my everything, whatever they were, I'm now so empty. And maybe I'm trying to figure out me in this. You get no love from around you. You can get so much judgment of like, well, we saw you were all like, we all knew what they were. We saw it. And you're once again not taken care of in your grief.
Correct. Thank you so much for saying that. You're not taken care of because exactly that. You're still not seen. You're still not held. And so it's almost like a replay of the abusive patterns that were happening when this person was still living. But the C side happens, the third
Right.
side of the triangle, I guess, is when people may have made the decision while the person was living to not have contact with them anymore. They're like,
That's
I'm
where I was going. Yep, a
done.
lot of
I'm
estrangement,
done,
right? On
right?
purpose, right? Took
I
a break.
can't do this. I cannot do this anymore. This person has my life is a mess. I'm finally got the courage to step away from this. I'm stepping away from this. Now, if it's a sudden death, that's going to be quite different than maybe if it's protracted. But either way, especially when it's protracted, so there's sort of the option to go see them. People in these positions feel very confused. Like, what is it? Do I go see them? Do I not go see them? And the thing I hear from a lot of people is, I feel like if I go see them, they've won. Right? They've won because I broke my no contact and they kind of got the upper hand. And when I walk people through this part of the landscape, that you've really made the concerted decision of, I'm not doing this anymore. This is too much harm. This has been too much abuse. Absolutely not. That I say, let's walk through this solely as it is for you. not how the family is going to say, oh, you did come back around, not how even the person who is ill might say, oh, look at you, you finally did come back around. Would you feel guilty? They'll get their snark in until their last breath. I promise you that with a lot of narcissistic folks. But with the but for the person who has gone through this and is trying to make decisions, it is a complex, I mean, thank goodness there's resources like yours, David. It's a complex landscape to navigate about what feels right for you, what will help you personally live with this. It's not about feeling that they got the upper hand and all of that. It was never about an upper hand. You were playing checkers, they were playing chess. You were in two different games. You were trying to love someone and they weren't allowing that.
And here's what's so hard. You have to find the I. You have to find you. And I got to tell you, I almost want to say I have some shame saying this, and I need to like release even that I have a judgment on it. Yesterday was my birthday. A couple of people already put belated birthday in the chat. Thank you for that. There is a part of me that even said yesterday, this day should really be about mom. She's the one that gave birth. Like, and I have to go, wait a minute. I celebrate her birthday. I don't make her birthday about any. Why can't I fully even give my birthday to me without still like, oh, it really should be hers? And to understand, it's been so ingrained before I was, knew what was going on. And it's that deep loss of self that's so hard to find. And that's kind of the grief of all this, is you're grieving you.
That's exactly.
You're grieving you.
Yep. That's exactly what you're grieving. And so you cut to the core of actually what healing and even experiencing narcissistic abuse is. You're grieving you. I'm going to use a word that's more of like a technical word, but it has resonance, which is, these are what we call relationships of subjugation. We have to be small, they get to be big, and not even that simple. We have to be in their service for this to work. So we had to pawn off ourselves to make this relationship work. We didn't do that intentionally. We didn't roll up and say, okay, show me the pawn shop, pawn it off myself. It was never that. It was a gradual process of giving up. And so not only do we feel some shame, like you just said, that I sort of gave myself up for this relationship, then we feel the whole mix of grief reactions like anger, that we say, what the hell just happened? And we feel the sense of injustice, which was, how was everyone okay with this? How was everyone willing to sit by and watch this happen? And nobody weighed in and nobody said this was okay. Because if someone had, we might have given ourselves some permission to say, this wasn't okay. And even if you had to stay in the relationship, being allowed to maintain that sense of this kind of relational organization, this asymmetry in a relationship is unacceptable. That when we don't have that, to have lost ourselves, and that's what healing, frankly, from narcissistic abuse is finding self again. Who you are, what are you about, strengths, weaknesses, what do you like? What do you like on your pizza? Where do you like to set the thermostat? What's your favorite TV show? All of that might have been stolen by the narcissistic relationship, because that quest towards meaning and purpose, there's a lot of intermediate steps there: the radical acceptance, the grief, the processing the loss, the seeing it clearly. But then to get to that next phase, it's really about showing up authentically. And as I always say to folks, David, authenticity is a funny animal and very much often comes out of grief. But authenticity can often be a lonely place in the best of possible ways. And what I mean by that is, a lot of folks are threatened by authentic people because you're showing up fully in your truth. And a lot of systems only maintain if you silence yourself. And then comes a new wave of grief when you realize whatever that system maybe it was your family system, maybe it was a system of friends, people who were around a marriage or a long-term relationship, that, oh, if I showed up as this false self, as not me, this was fine. But now I'm showing up. It's not like you're showing up yelling and carrying a shield and all that. You're just showing up as you. But you realize then these people you thought loved you wanted this performative you. And that's another form of grief.
So one of the things I also want to mention, and we deal with this with teaching people in the Grief Educator program, because I got to tell you, therapists, coaches, don't get grief work, grief studies narcissism. I mean, these are things that we encounter every day. And there's no, like, thank goodness, like you've got books and so many resources and, you know, the book. And I just want to say, oh my gosh, it's not you. Literally, if you're loving this, it is a map. It is a map. It is a light. It is a way. So one other thing I hear in my grief work is, they died. I'm so ashamed. I feel relieved. I feel safer in the world that they have died. How horrible of me.
Mm-hmm. So, so it is, first of all, that absolute radical acceptance of you are now psychologically safer in the world, right? And to feel that, but that idea that
Wait. You are actually psychologically safer.
you are.
Just take that in. That's a big one there. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm. So you are psychologically safer when they're gone, because, you know, this gorgeous sympathetic nervous system and central nervous system we have, and this even more gorgeous body we have, and all your body ever wants to do is love you, despite all the ways we critique it. All these things knew, right? All these elements, these detecting mechanisms in ourselves knew that this wasn't safe, but we were told by society that, well, this is your spouse or this is your mother, so you gotta love them, and that's just how it is. And how many people, even in this program today, were told, well, it's your mother, as though, and okay, so where the hell's the rest of the sentence? Like, that's not enough. This person harmed me. It's not okay, and we're grandparent, whatever. And so that sense that is, you were not psychologically safe with them. The nature of a narcissistic relationship is the absolute, you know, abolishment of psychological safety. You're not, because they are going in there to weaken you to strengthen themselves. That was always the relationship, no matter what the nature of the relationship was. So when they no longer exist, you are now a little psychologically safer in the world. The challenge is that there's other people who might still be carrying the banner, family members, friends, even your own adult children. So you still have to deal with that, but that core person might still, that has happened. And so you need that safe place to explore that, because it absolutely, it brings up shame and guilt and feelings of horror in people, like, I am a monster. I am a terrible person. And I'm here to tell you, I've heard this probably at least 100 times. I've had clients call me literally after the parent was, you know, sort of declared, like, you know, that this person has passed, and they will ring me and say, it's done. And I am lighter in my soul, and you're the only person I can tell. And I said, of course you are. You're a little safer now. And most people don't have that person to turn to immediately to say, yes, you are safer now. But to give yourself permission, in a way, your body is like, okay. So there's all these parts of ourselves, that thinking part and this feeling part, are not always on the same page. And we've been programmed to believe that it's a bad thing to think these things are a relief. In communities like this, you realize that this is quite normal. But when it comes to narcissism, this happens all the time. You are not a bad person. You are actually a person who has been through something. And now again, that threat no longer exists. If the threat's gone, whatever it may be, we're always going to feel a little bit more in ourselves, in our bodies, you know, feeling a little bit more whole. That's a normal sense. If we viewed this as any other sense of threat, folks, let's say there was a burglar going through your neighborhood, and then you get the news that the burglar was arrested, right? And there were multiple burglars, all gone. They were all arrested, and now the burglaries have stopped. You would feel safer in your neighborhood and your home. This is no different.
Give us some tips. They're still alive. We're in grief. You know, maybe grief was our wake-up call.
Mm-hmm.
I understand I have to figure out how to accept them. So they're still alive. Tell us can we live with the narcissist? Do we need to take a break? And I know, like, thank goodness there's a book, because I know it's not a quick answer.
Mm-hmm. So can we live with a narcissist? Some of us have to, David. So there has to be, the answer is that yes. Is it easy? Not always. So, you know, number one, this is why in my live, I did a live this morning that you heard, right, on radical acceptance. And I'm going to reiterate a point about that. Folks, radical acceptance, I want you to view it as a door, okay? And the wider that door is open, the more hope you feel that this relationship could change, could get better, that you could do something to change them. As you get deeper into radical acceptance, that door starts to close. But think of a door in the night. If the hallway light is on, still some of the light might come in, right? Radical acceptance is when that door is fully shut and you've sealed it off from the light. I don't mean that to be a negative thing. It's that you're no longer going to sort of be tricked into that hope, right? So that piece of it, that you get to that place sort of wholly, right? Is sort of the first step in creating this sense of, can this get better? Can I live with them? Because what the thing I'm trying to create for people, and I talk about this a lot in the book, is this idea of, we want to take away the idea of surprise. I know that a person hasn't fully radically accepted if they're still surprised by a narcissistic person's behavior. Because I'm like, if you radically accepted, no matter what wacky, grandiose, inappropriate, manipulative thing they say, you're basically, it's more of like a, here we go. And it's not that you're happy about it. It's not that it doesn't hurt you. It's not that you're not disgusted. It's not that you don't feel it. Those things are obviously going to happen. You want to feel, but you're no longer surprised. And that matters, because when we're surprised, we're a little destabilized. And when we're surprised,
Wait,
we
when
often.
we're surprised, we're destabilized. I just want to highlight that. So
Mhm.
big, okay?
All right. So when we're surprised, we're destabilized. So then we turn it inward. Like, was I dumb? Like, no, you weren't dumb. This takes a moment. And keeping that door cracked open is a very natural part of this process of hope, because you do love this person. But if you do live with them and you can get to that full radical acceptance, a lot of this is about changing up how you engage. And something I've long given out as an acronym is, don't go deep anymore. And by what do I mean by that with them? Don't defend, don't engage, don't explain, and don't personalize. Okay, deep. Don't defend, don't engage, don't explain, and don't personalize. I am not saying this is easy, right? It is a natural tendency when somebody is telling us we did something and we didn't, when somebody's basically hitting us with a lie to want to defend ourselves. But all of you have tried to defend yourselves, and you just end up in a big gaslighted heap of being doubted and denied and being told that you're the one who has something wrong with you. And when we try to explain ourselves, they're not listening. It's really all about domination in these relationships. It's their world and we're just living in it. So it's really about disengagement. And it is, and listen, not don't personalize as hard when someone is doing these things to you. You just have the bad luck of being in this position. They would be doing this to anyone. So you're just unfortunate to be in the position of potentially their child, their spouse, whomever. They may be doing it more to you than others for a complex series of reasons, but it's not personal. This is just how they regulate. It's honestly, it's in a strange way, it is a bit of bad luck. But as we disengage and don't go deep is a big part of that, not engaging. We catch ourselves and we're more careful in how we share about ourselves. Another hack, David, I want to share is the big mistake we make, all of us make in narcissistic relationships, is we still sort of fawn over them. We're still trying to win them over. We're still trying to be noticed by them, right? But they're not really listening, or if they do, it's not to our credit. So what happens is when we get good news, this is a great example. When we get good news, one of our tendencies is to go right to that narcissistic person and say, hey, just want to let you know, look at the new VP, or guess who got that position. And we're thinking like, whoo, like maybe they'll see me now. You know what they're going to do? They're going to either make fun of you, they're going to shut it down, they're going to minimize it, they're going to trivialize it, or they're going to feel threatened by it. So now they're feeling competitive. So they're really going to come out punching. And so many people have gotten lovely news in their lives, small news, big news, and have made the mistake of taking it to the narcissistic person first. And it takes the joy out of it. So here's an easy hack. Take that good news. Whoever you're one, two, if you're lucky, three good people. One of them might even be a therapist, might even be this group. But take your good news into safe, loving hands. People who are like, I am so proud of you. Oh my gosh, let's go out to dinner. I am so proud of you. I love you. I knew it. And I'm so happy, right? That feels good. Being that good. So by the time you do tell the narcissist and they sort of rain on your parade, you're like, I've had my moment. But folks, I'm going to give you the second, even more important part of this hack. Don't take bad news to them first.
I was just going there. I was just
Yep.
going. And
Yep.
here's the thing, and believe it or not, we're almost out of time. Here's the thing I want people to hear, and they've heard me say this: your grief story is so precious. When they swat it down, you must not keep bringing it there.
Yep.
You must
Yep.
take it, whether it's to our groups, your therapist, your grief counselor,
Friend.
the friends that do get it. It's too precious to put in the hands of people who don't see it. And you know, we all know when we talk, you know, grief is not about just, you know, I always say grief is about death. It's, you know, because I think breakup is the death of a relationship, divorce is the death of a marriage, betrayal is the death of trust, a job loss is the death of that paycheck with those people. We have so many different places we experience grief. And you are shedding amazing light on how we must also grieve ourselves and the loss of ourselves and help us finding ourselves in this. I just want to say, it is amazing to me. We have so many people live here today. We are in overflow because there's so many people. I thought we might get a few questions. There's more than we could ever answer today. And I'm so grateful that there is this. So It's Not You is this amazing book. And here's the thing. I love, you know, people are like, when my son died, they're like, well, how does a grief expert go through grief like everyone else?
Yeah.
In the same way with you and I talked yesterday, you were having to deal with a narcissist.
Yes.
We talked about this today,
Yeah.
you know, so I'm not saying anything you're not saying publicly, but you are incredibly real. You're one of us. You're like 10 feet ahead of us with a light showing us the way.
Thank you.
We've been putting the link in the chat. You're going to get this replay. We're going to email you the whole replay with links. The book is It's Not You.
And if you, and just want to throw in something, if you order the book before, including the 23rd of February, as long as you order it before then, and that we will have, if you go to, maybe we can even provide you the link or something.
I'll make sure we put the link in the replay.
Because what we have,
I want them to get it all.
Yeah, because we have a bunch of giveaways we're doing. Like we're giving like $500 worth of stuff away. We're giving away a course on gaslighting. We're giving away a nine interview series on betrayal and all, and the science of narcissism and all of that. And we have a Facebook group that's been organized just around this book. So all you need to do is get the book by the 23rd, and all of that can be made available.
Yeah, and if they've already pre-ordered it, they can still get
all that stuff. You just have to figure. Yeah, and if you and I, David, can talk about the mechanics about getting that info, and I believe you can even get that stuff on my website at drramani.com.
We're going to get it to you, and you're going to get this replay. And if you have the thought, like, let me show this to my narcissist, it's going to change them. Please don't. It's about you. The grief is about you. Let's find you. You have become such an amazing person in my life. Just a tender friend.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
It was my absolute pleasure and honor. And I'm humbled and I'm grateful. And I've been watching some of the comments go by, and such raw, real stuff folks are going through. I'm so grateful you've made this, but I can tell you this, one of the questions that caught my eye is it really ever possible to heal? Not only is it possible, even now, I just got an email from someone today, someone who went through horrific narcissistic abuse, mother, father, grandparents, partner, and was told, you'll never be a filmmaker. And she's about to debut her first feature at a big film festival. She feels whole. She feels in her body. She feels lovable and cherishable. And it's almost one of those things like, how long is this going to take her? It's going to take a long time. We got there. This will happen. I see it happen over and over and over again. And I promise you will. Just remember that loss of self, you can get that back. And remember, above all else, it's not you.
Yeah. And, you know, the last thing I want to say about this that ties into that is, especially when someone has died, people are like, my story is over. And I always remind them exactly a different way of saying it. Your story is still going on. You are alive. You matter. Finding you is worth it. The healing is worth it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Amazing book. Please pre-order it. Get it. It's just truly, truly amazing. It's a gift.
And it comes out Tuesday. You'll have it Tuesday. It's almost here. So
and by the way, I got to tell you a little thing I'm doing. I have so many people I know that are dealing with this. I've pre-ordered it for them. I'm not saying, oh, by the way, I think your family member's a narcissist. I'm just gifting them the book. They will do what they want. So it's a great book to gift to people too. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. It was so interesting. It's been a long time since I've done this. I remember doing this kind of thing once before where, oops, this is sort of looking odd. There we go. I was moving my computer around so I could comment throughout this. That I remember doing something like this a long time ago, where I was listening to something and I was commenting in real time. It was a long time. It might have been a early pandemic thing. And I hope that that was helpful because it was interesting to watch it, but then be able to comment on top of it and then pull other stuff out. I found that was interesting. I don't love listening to myself though. So that was my own journey there. The thing I kind of got cut off on in this, and I remember actually after the original program, got an email from someone's like, well, what are you supposed to do with the bad news? Now, I think a lot of you who are used to hearing my are used to hearing my content, you know that when there's bad news, and I think we sort of kind of floated around that drain a lot in this program, is don't take that to the narcissistic person first either. If there's bad news, you want to, again, those same people you might take the good news to, take the bad news to them. Have a chance to talk with someone who might just tell you, hold you and listen to you and help you feel safe and all of that. So that's, that's the piece to remember, is that we need these places to go to. And sometimes the bad news might be a small thing like the dishwasher being broken. And maybe ultimately you're going to have to say how much it costs to get the dishwasher fixed. And then there's also the big ticket stuff, but especially when it's big ticket stuff. There's layoffs coming at work, or a friend of yours got laid off and you kept your job, or whatever that looks like, or you got a medical diagnosis. Take it to those safe people first. You will not regret that. The big mistake we think is that this will be the narcissistic person's chance to shine when I give them this bad news, and it doesn't work that way. So I understand why people want to do that. It's almost like, okay, the day-to-day stuff, I get it, but in these moments when you really need empathy and compassion, that's not what you want to do. So again, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as we talked about the various ways grief shows up in these relationships, even the death of a narcissistic person and the complicated feelings that brings up. So what I'd like to do, and again, what I'll do instead of yammering on about this raffle, remember, we're now sort of switching it up a little bit. And anyone who's done the pre-order incentive, you're going to obviously get all your free giveaway stuff. But we thought, you know what? Let's just do one last thing here, our kind of last hurrah, before we sort of, stop pestering you so much. But it's a good book to remember that we're having a raffle. So the sort of the raffle ticket, if you will, is to buy the book. And then all you need to do is get the hard copy ebook, and then you'll have a chance to get entered into a raffle where we're giving away a tea with Dr. Ramani, a sort of a 30-minute kind of a Zoom kind of chit chat. Tea optional. You could drink coffee. It's not a requirement. I will be drinking tea. And so I look forward to that. And 20 of you will be winners of that. We're also, though, and part of that raffle, it's not going to just be that. We're raffling signed books. You'll let us know your name or tell us who you want it signed to if you're one of those winners. And of course, the almighty box. We're going to be raffling several of those off too. So please, 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 if you ever was a time you were going to order this book, or you were going to order more, again, unlike the giveaways, once you ordered the book, whether you ordered 1 or 10, you were going to get the giveaways. But now, if you're ordering multiple books, then you get multiple entries. Okay. And so let us know that, and we'll have the pre-order verification form here as part of I think my group will put it in the chat and however they're handling that. So let's go ahead then and let's take on these questions. Okay, let's do the questions, because that's really what I wanted to make tonight about. Usually it's like 1, 2, a couple of quick questions on a live. Let's go deep into these questions that I'm hoping have accumulated, like I said, and I hope you enjoyed the program. So let's see what we got here. How do you reconcile the grief of losing the narcissistic person? For example, knowing the person you loved never existed and missing them, with the realization that they will never change. So, this is a really, really insightful question by Renee, because what Renee has picked up on is this particular element here of knowing the person you loved never existed. In essence, we've kind of like put that person together. There was someone we hoped that they would be, that they were this person for at least for some period of time we believed was empathic and compassionate and all these things. And those things probably weren't, they were more flimsy. But also remember that there were parts of this that were, I don't want to say that this entire relationship is a fiction. That part's untrue. There are qualities of this person. One thing that comes up over and over again, they'll say this person was so smart. This narcissistic person is so smart. And I really appreciated the intellect, or they are so wise about this one. They knew so much about movies. And I loved that part of them. But once we lose them, right? We've lost someone who we kind of constructed a lot of in our head. So we're not even sure exactly what we're losing. We're losing some real things. And that grief is quite real. All of the grief is very real. But that grief is like, this is not in my life. You do miss them. Let's break out of this cycle. What I'll never buy is that people saying, oh, you don't really miss them because you kind of made it up in your head. You didn't make it up in your head. It was something in your life, good, bad, or indifferent. It was something in your life. And so, yes, you miss that. So then it's that realization that they'll never change. Frankly, I think if you can harness that recognition that they were not going to change, not for you, not for someone else, there can be a real power in that in terms of helping you work through the grief. Because something I'll often do with folks is I'll say, can you play this out? Can you say, okay, there is the person I was in the relationship with. There was the person I kind of thought I was in the relationship with. So you're losing both of them. Okay. And then there is that sense of you're also losing a third thing, which was the hope it was going to change and get better. Okay. So now that's another thing you're grieving. But the thing I'll also encourage people to do is play it out. Play this relationship out. In a way, it's almost, you're trying to play a couple of chess moves out in a game, or you're playing any game. You're like, okay, if I do this, then I do that. Oh, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. Anything we do in a sequence. If you're playing out a narcissistic relationship, you are always going to kind of end up in the same dead ends. Like, if I say it this way, say, oh, no, they're going to get mad at me that way. If I say that, oh, no, they're going to tell me that they're going to gaslight me that way. You start to see that all the pathways are ending up in these unhealthy places. So armed with that realization that they're not going to change, allowing that grief to flow through, and there's no shortcut on the grief. You are going to go through that. You are going to wonder. But playing this out, again, what would have happened if I stuck this out? You do start to say like, ooh, all the destinations here are ultimately unhealthy. That's where the ick list comes in. That's where reflecting on it this way comes in the sense of this was never going to be healthy. I did this recently, actually, around a relationship of mine. And I thought, oh yeah, there was a reason that this particular friendship kind of hit the skids, because we were never going to get to this place. I could see if I brought this up, then that would happen. If I did this, then that was going to happen. So sometimes it's just something that's a reminder. It's not meant to minimize the grief. It still has to be worked through, but it does become a reminder of what would have happened if you stayed in the relationship. We have another question, please. So, how do narcissistic people deal with death or dying? My narcissistic husband, who wasn't close to his parents, had a breakdown when his mother died. It was hard to understand since he barely spoke to her. This is such a good question. Thank you. So far, these questions are amazing. This is such an important question, which is, how do narcissistic people process death and dying? It's sort of an interesting thing. I don't want to lose your question, what I'm about to say, but I think it's a very interesting observation. We're sort of caught right now in sort of this belief that we can live kind of forever. We can have an 18-year-old body when we're 90, right? That's a lot of the narrative out there. If you eat these things, drink these things, take these things, do these exercises, whatever it may be, sleep a certain number of hours, and follow this regimented lifestyle, you could get there. When you think what the ultimate grandiosity is, folks, what is it? The ultimate grandiosity is that a narcissist might believe that I'm the first person who's not going to die, right? Our mortality is a fear that human beings have grappled with since the beginning of time and always will. It's part of the human experience. Because of that, narcissistic people can be very, very uncomfortable with deaths that remind them of their own mortality. And those might be the death of peers, but the death of a parent can be profound. One thing I haven't talked about a lot, I have to say, just as this question came up, at least this is such an interesting question you've asked, is We often don't ask the question of how does an adult narcissistic person interact with their parents, right? Lots of times, like, adult narcissistic people don't like older people, right? Older people, they might experience them as an inconvenience, or it's harder for them to get around. They might need more help. They may not be up for the same things. They may be hard of hearing. They may, whatever it may be that they might view as an infirmity in an older person, that they won't like that. And also for them, looking at an older person, it gives, again, that mortality and morbidity kind of reminder. So but when a narcissistic person loses their parent, there can be a range of responses. Lisa here was commenting on, like, they had such a strong reaction to this and had nothing to do with them. But remember this piece though, and I don't know if this is the case for you, Lisa, is that when a narcissistic person experiences the loss of a parent in particular, they may have constructed a relationship they have with their parent in their head, but didn't act on it. I cannot tell you over the years how many narcissistic clients I've worked with who over and over and over again would paint this picture of, like, what a great man their father was and what a wonderful childhood they had. But then they dropped, but then from time to time, these things would come in that did not track, like really actually very difficult childhood. And the way they're describing either parent, it was really awful. And when I tried to point it out, I'd say, wow, your mom said that to you? Like that must have been really hard. No, my mother's a wonderful woman. So that grandiosity means that you can't not be from a great family, right? Because then you're not perfect. So the narcissistic person will sometimes internally maintain a schema of a wonderful parent, not interact with that parent, maintain that framework. But when that person dies, it can destabilize the narcissistic person in many, many ways. So, and then finally, there's that shame part. Narcissistic people are not psychopathic, folks. They know when they're doing something that may not show up as good on other people's radars. And so then when something like this happens, and maybe they felt that they didn't actually help these people enough, or someone points that out to them, there may be a sense of shame, and shame for a narcissistic person is volcanic. It will come out of there and they'll have these very strong reactions. So that's why witnessing a narcissistic person go through an experience of grief can actually be very confusing, because their reactions are often quite on one pole or the other. They're either almost like seemingly indifferent and kind of just pick up and get going with their day like nothing happened, or at the other extreme, it is an absolutely almost, it's seemingly like disproportionate grief given the nature of their relationship with the person. So I hope that answers your question. Can we have the next question, please? So someone's asking here, I will be going to Bali, I think that says, to see my son graduate from high school. His father is narcissistic. Any tips about how I can deal with him so I don't get affected by his narcissistic behavior? First of all, congratulations to your son. Second of all, Bali's beautiful, and I hope you have the most wonderful, wonderful time there. Okay, so now we have the bigger problem, which is no matter how beautiful a place is, these dynamics are going to be quite challenging. So let's break this down. Number one, why are you going to Bali? It's your son's graduation. So always have your mission squarely in your, just sort of right there in your binoculars. That's why you're going. Okay. That's number one. Number two, it seems like you're pretty clear and know that his father's behavior is narcissistic. Radical acceptance, realistic expectations. You know that he is not going to behave well. Just think about what I just said on the interview with David Kessler. What is the thing we're trying? What radical acceptance? We know you're fully there if you're not surprised. So one of the keys is to be prepared for this, whatever that looks like. So you might think, I'm going to grit my teeth and get through. Maybe there's going to be a family party or a family dinner. You know that you're probably going to get baited in the whole 9 yards, but you want to be there for your son. So you have a series of conversation topics picked out, you find out the people you can talk to are healthier. You might find a way to be helpful that day. I'm making this up because I don't know if that's what you're going to be doing. You work with your son to figure out what your son wants. Your son might be onto it too and may not push you to spend too much time with this person. This narcissistic dad is very likely to bait you, especially if the narcissistic dad doesn't see you a lot. So get ready to yellow rock your way through this. You can gray rock, but I think your son might find that to be antagonistic. Just keeping the answers short, sweet, and like I said, what you're trying to do here is kind of keep the peace for your son, celebrate your son, and then make those sort of internal boundaries. Like if this topic of conversation goes on for too long, I'm going to claim jet lag, or I'm going to go take a rest, or I'm going to go take a break. And again, also this whole, but I want to get to the last part of your question here, Michelle, because this is the most important part. How can I deal with him so I don't get affected by his narcissistic behavior? Let's keep it real. You are going to be affected by his narcissistic behavior. Radical acceptance doesn't mean you stop feeling things. Radical acceptance doesn't turn you into Teflon. You will be affected. There's something I write about in the book called the prepare and release strategy. You have to prepare before you see this person. And that might mean breathing, grounding, meditation, exercise, something that helps you feel sort of more centered and focused, right? You don't want to go in there unprepared. You don't want to be rushing. You want to make sure you get there in a timely way. So you can take a few of those deep breaths. Then you're going to go through the time with him, and afterwards you're going to be exhausted. Again, build in something on the back end, whether that's take a shower, take a nap, go to sleep early, eat a healthy meal, talk to a friend, whatever helps you, again, come back down, helps you feel in your body. It might be more of that breathing and meditating. You will be affected. So let's take that off the table as something that won't happen, because you're a human being. It means everything's working. But by preparing, let's sort of, again, figure out a way, though, for you to not, by being realistic, you'll dial down that sense of surprise. And if you can dial that down and keep your son in the center focus of those binoculars, of that telescope, however it is you want to view that, then I think you'll be able to get through this. And above all else, create some time in there where you can do some things that give you joy and really try to create some one-on-one time with your son. And I think if you can do all that, you might get through it. You will be affected. And so again, be gentle with yourself. There's no version of this where we're not. Can we get the next question? So in this one, Dr. Ramani, I'm feeling traumatized and stuck by the very sudden discard by my narcissistic ex. How do I move beyond the grief I'm feeling? I'm devastated because I never saw it coming. Okay, so this one, late girl, is I'm going to just make it next. I don't want to lose this one. I start coming. This is big, okay? Let's talk about this idea of the sudden narcissistic dump, right? Because I even am guilty of making this mistake. And when I see a question like this one, I almost want to apologize, because I think there's an insensitivity to what I've said in the past here, which is, they dumped you. Great. You should be glad you're rid of them. But it doesn't feel like that. You're going through real grief. You were in a relationship with someone. Obviously, it was not healthy, but they dropped you very instantly. For anyone who has any history of abandonment wounds or wounds around not being seen, the sense of being suddenly dropped, and I think even when you don't have abandonment wounds, it's very destabilizing. Okay. So that's that. Number one, we don't feel safe when we're not stable. And for somebody to suddenly leave us, especially when you've been putting up with their nonsense for a long period of time, and it was obviously not a super healthy relationship, but the never seeing it coming. I want to also put a finer point on this piece. I was just talking with someone recently who said, couple of times, this conversation's come up a few times this week, is people saying, I was in a narcissistic relationship, but I kind of thought it was going okay. They said, so they were going through a narcissist, didn't know it. So they're going through a relationship. Let's put it that way. They're going through a relationship. Everything was going fine. They seemed to be having a nice time. Things were good. And then out of nowhere, they learn about multiple betrayals. Somebody says like, hey, you guys, you're really in a relationship with this person? Because can I tell you whatever? And they learn something, or they see something on a phone or in a tablet or someplace. They find out. They find out this person's been on a dating site the whole time they were in a relationship with them, whatever it is, right? And they say it was awful because the relationship didn't feel terrible, right? And then when they confronted this person on it, the torrent of gaslighting and abuse and shaming and all of it. Because here's the thing, you might be saying, well, a healthy person wouldn't have done those things in the first place. That's true. A healthy person probably would not have done a ton of betraying. But we can even take a page out of sort of the sex addiction world. Not all people who go through have compulsive sex behavior or sex addiction are narcissistic. They're simply not true. A lot of them are, but not all. So a person goes through that and might be sort of doing all kinds of, whatever inappropriate things that are not part of the relationship. If caught, will say, They will cop to it. They will feel a lot of shame. They will recognize that the relationship may now end. That's a very different experience than what this person's experiencing, right? So the grief when something happens all of a sudden, it's like when somebody dies all of a sudden. People will say this is very different. If someone's sick, you're sad and you help them, but there was almost like this preparation for the loss. There's no preparation for this loss. So this grief is going to take it's going to be a few different steps. You're going to have sort of the shock and awe phase for a while, right? Like, what the hell just happened? And that's going to really be a time when you literally feel sick, like somebody said who's lost someone who's died in a very sudden way. And it really does mean taking that, whether that's you get into bed for a few days, whatever you do, you may literally have to cut out of your routines for a little bit, because it's so destabilizing. You will start to feel human again, right? And then the picture is going to start coming in a more and more whole focus. And even back to the very first question I had answered, Renee's question, was that is this idea that you will then start feeling like, oh yeah, this might have played out, this because there whatever this reason, quote unquote reason, this person had for just jumping ship, this reason was always there. It's just now you're having to integrate that whatever this thing is was in the relationship, whether it's part of their character, whether it's some other event. So how do you move beyond it? You don't move beyond it until you actually really feel it, and you feel it and you be in it. And as I always say, therapists have a huge advantage because there's one thing that's always on our side when it comes to healing, and that's time. And so, yes, time will pass and it will feel, and you will feel stronger in yourself. But the one thing that really, Lake Girl, I know you're going to want to work on is trust. Because after something like this, we often stop trusting ourselves. How did I not see this? Well, I'm telling you now, I'm hearing situation over situation over situation of people who said, this actually felt like a normal relationship. Like, no relationship is perfect. Sure, this wasn't perfect, but they were able to, they show up like this sort of great partner, good partner for so long. And then the betrayal, they said, was something so monumental that I now feel insane, because how would someone not see that happen? And let me also put another finer point on that. When a narcissistic person is well supplied, especially if they're doing shady stuff, have another life, have other people in their life, getting a little, getting that sort of like dopamine lift from those dating app, whatever it might be, they often seem really great and well put together because they're getting so much supply from other sources, but they might be really regulated with you. But for you, Lake Girl, it's going to take a minute. It is when these things happen out of nowhere, it's let the grief run through, let yourself pull the covers over your head for a minute. Being in therapy, being in a grief group can make a huge, huge difference. But then as you come out of this devastation, some of the patterns of the relationship will feel more clear to you. You'll say, okay, there were some other things happening here. And then you're going to move forward and you're not going to trust easily initially. And then you're going to learn to trust. And this is going to be a process, but it is a process and you're not alone in this. But I think what's hard is figuring out, how, like where were the fault lines in this thing? And it can take a while to figure that out. But sometimes you might find out that this is somebody who needed tons of supply. Like I said, I don't know your relationship story. It could be that this was somebody who was getting their supply in other places. And it could also be, you're calling this person narcissistic. So there's some awareness. I'm assuming that this person had low empathy, entitlement, grandiosity, arrogance, excessive need for admiration and validation. So you knew these things about this person. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be using the word. And because you knew these things, that, again, what we said to Renee, play this out, play the relationship out. Because if they were indeed a narcissistic ex, that means they were a narcissistic partner when you were in it. And that was going to mean a finite shelf life, at least a healthy relationship anyhow. So I really hope time, Lake Girl, it's going to be time. Another question. Someone says, I know I can't expect anything from them. How do you separate without their wrath and my guilt? Okay. So that's this, you're asking a question here, which is almost like one of those impossible questions, which is, it's a, how can I end a relationship with a narcissistic person without them becoming enraged at me? And it really depends on how invested they are in the relationship. I know for a few people, like some narcissistic people, they don't want to leave the relationship. Whatever it is, it's working for them, right? If there's a need getting met for them, they're going to want to stay. I would say that if you're and this is what the problem is, you're in a relationship with somebody, you can't expect anything from the relationship, right? So that after a while, you're like, this is not pleasant anymore. This radical acceptance thing just took away the only thing I had going for me in this relationship, which was hope. With hope gone, this is just a relationship where I can have zero expectations. It just doesn't feel good, right? And around that time, people are starting to think, okay, I'm thinking about dismantling this. You can also initially, I'd say, move slowly. I'm assuming you might, Dan, already be in your process of disengagement. You're just not engaging as much. You're not taking the bait. You're not getting into it with them. If you haven't started doing that, start doing that. Okay. Sometimes the disengagement does sort of change the balance of the relationship quite a bit. So they can kind of get a little less interested. Now, it depends on the narcissistic person. Some vulnerable narcissistic folks are going to start trying to pull you back in. Vulnerable narcissistic folks do struggle a bit with rejection sensitivity and abandonment wounds, right? So they may try to pull you back in. They're not going to they may not want to lose control of the narrative with you or just the loss of you. In a grandiose narcissistic relationship, if you're bringing something to the table they want, whether it's status, whether it's money, whether it's help, whatever it may be, and they don't want to lose that thing, you're also going to incur their wrath. So if the loss of your supply is going to be a problem for them, whether due to abandonment or whether due to inconvenience, then you're going to face their wrath. The other thing that narcissistic people don't like is when people leave them, it leaves them feeling like they're not powerful. It leaves them feeling like they're out of control, right? And they do not like that. That's why again, Lake Girl's a great example, though. Even when they do leave, it doesn't always feel good, right? In her case, it was very, very sudden. But in this case with Dan, it's ensuring that you are disengaging, almost like stepping back. I don't think in many cases there's a version of a narcissistic breakup that doesn't come without their wrath. That's just the case. And it's a terrible feeling because you know that either you stay stuck here and avoid their wrath, or you step out and you incur their wrath. Getting your ducks in line so that the wrath isn't too destabilizing helps. But then you talk about your guilt, right? Well, that's where we see that the indoctrination of the narcissistic relationship was sort of full throttle, because we're actually doing something for ourselves. We are taking care of ourselves. We are protecting ourselves. Well, you were told a long time ago that to do for you already, that's a bad thing. So you feel guilty, but you're also a human, compassionate person. And there might have been, you might see that the narcissistic person relies on you for a lot of stuff. And we all overdo in our narcissistic relationships, right? It's part of that safety or trauma response of, well, if I do things for them, then maybe they'll love me. Well, it's not love, but they certainly do like you doing things for them, right? So now you're going to pull that away. And that can leave us feeling guilty in the sense of you feel sorry for them, because it sort of feels as though they're not going to be able to even get these things done without my help. Maybe in some cases, you might be making more money than the narcissistic person. So you're that source of support. But I'm going to say this, that most narcissistic people function quite well in the world, in fact, better than most of us, right? In most cases. I don't know if this is your case, Dan. But they can get up. They can go to a job. They can maintain relationships. They can certainly advocate for themselves with you and ask for what they want and all of those things, right? They can get all the things they need. So there's also the capability that this partner of yours that you have zero expectations for could have gotten up and gotten help, could have been self-reflective, could have been aware of how they affected you. But they didn't do that, did they? So you're carrying the whole bag on this relationship. And that's just not an equitable, or nor is it a tenable way to approach this. Try a slow, gradual disengagement. But then I'm going to say, when you finally do sever it, be prepared for the wrath. And you might, if you can try to get ahead of it where you will, talk to people, say, listen, this person's not going to be happy. And if they reach out to you and say things that are messed up, I'm just saying, like, this is what I'm expecting. So you can kind of get away with it, get ahead of a smear campaign if that's what you're worried about. If you're worried about stalking behavior and all that, make whatever adjustments you need to make. Post-separation abuse is real. But we have to break out of this cycle of, I want to leave, but have them not be mad. In many cases, you could wait a long time for those stars to line up to get them into a situation where they're not going to be mad. And as a result, you will then be really, really left holding the bag. I remember being in a narcissistic relationship once, and I was so afraid to leave. I thought, I'm going to try to keep surrounding us with beautiful women, and maybe then this person would want to be with a beautiful woman, and then I'd be sorted. So I was even trying to find my replacement ahead of time. So I get this. It didn't work. I left the relationship. There was lots of wrath, but I did try. I tried those things so I wouldn't feel guilty. So I get it. Okay, so here we have a question. It says, how can I help one of my siblings who's being narcissistically abused see that they're being abused? This is a great question. And it is a hard one. And we could extend this question to even go beyond just sibling, but I think a sibling raises a unique issue. Within the same family system, you will have siblings who see it clearly and cut bait a long time ago. You'll have siblings who are as bad as the parents who created the system. And you will have siblings who just literally don't see it. And you're watching them, and especially if they're a decent person, it's incredibly painful to watch someone in real time being manipulated, giving up on themselves to make something work. And what gets really hard is if you were to tell this sibling directly what is being experienced, they may shut you down and say, how could you say that? That's not what's happening. And now you're sort of being viewed as sort of the problematic person, right? Anytime you want to illuminate a person's experience, what you're witnessing in someone, you want to proceed very gently. And some of the best, I always say in this case, start with empathy. So if you sense that your sibling's being narcissistically abused, it can't be easy. And my guess is they're probably struggling. So, and I don't know who's narcissistically abusing them, if it's your parent or if it's their partner or some other family member, I don't know. I would say the first thing to do is check in with this sibling and say, hey, are you okay? What's been going on? And let them talk and see if they get to it. If they are being narcissistically abused, I'm guessing not everything's okay. And if they don't give you that answer, if they really are like, no, everything's great, everything's fine, you clearly see that you know they're being narcissistically abused. So my guess is you've witnessed something. The next time you witness something, approach them gently and say, I'm going to make up an example here. Let's say you see a conversation between them, or you read a text message they get or something, and it's very clear that it was a harmful, toxic, invalidating, kind of an experience, right? And then you roll up and you say, hey, I saw what happened there. Are you okay? Because I have to say that the way that such and such talked to you, it wasn't respectful. And I just was worried about you and I wanted to check in. Here's the thing. Your sibling may still turn around and say, no, I'm fine. No, it's nothing. It's nothing. But something starts to happen because I promise you, your sibling knows it wasn't right or felt it wasn't right. And when another person weighs in and says, I saw that. Are you okay? Even if the person doesn't cop to it right away, you've now planted a teeny tiny seed of validation, quite frankly. Could also be experienced as a seed of doubt where they're like, oh, probably wasn't okay. And this person said it's not okay. And so maybe it's not okay. It can be really, really, a lot of things happen at the same time when somebody watches an interaction we have with someone and they see that we're being harmed and they weigh in. It doesn't happen a lot. A lot of people will let us just be harmed and not say a word. So when someone does, and does it gently, not like, that's not okay how they talk to you. That's not okay. They're a narcissist. That's going to shut this person, your sibling, down. But approach it when you see an interaction and just say, I was checking in because that did not feel comfortable. I saw that. And they were talking over you, or you were speaking the truth and they were denying that truth. Like, are you okay? And bring it around to that, are you okay? That will plant enough of a seed of a doubt. Janja Lalich calls it breaking the shelf when she's working with cult survivors. But then that happens enough times, this person, your sibling, is going to start thinking maybe something is wrong, but it's a slow burn and it can be hard to hit someone just sort of square, with something, say, oh, I think they're narcissistic. That never works. Come up slowly, do it with empathy, choose interactions you see that are problematic, and don't say that's bad, but say, I just saw that they were, and point out what they were doing. They were talking over you. They were done, the thing you said was true, and they were telling you it wasn't true, and then check in and see if they're okay. So I hope that helps, Amy. I have another question. Or maybe we don't have any more questions. Here we go. No? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so...
We do, I'm just having a technical issue. It'll just be 1 second.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I can stay with that, pointing it out. It's interesting you asked that question too, Amy. There's a whole section in the book about that. How do I support someone who's being narcissistically abused? So I just want to let you know there's actually much more structured guidance in the book as well. So Brittany is asking, I have been no contact with my father for many years now. But why does my mother and why do other family members continue to say when he dies, I will feel bad, or push me to have contact? Why? Brittany, you know why? For the same reason family members tell people you have to forgive them, because if you don't, you'll feel bad. They're projecting their need to maintain a status quo on you. Only you know the answer to this, Brittany, right? You know your history with your father. You have to really reach into yourself and ask yourself, you must be feeling better from having done this because you're doing it, to reflect on the changes in you. David Kessler and I were talking about that sense of psychological safety that comes from when the narcissistic person is no longer in our world, either through no contact, or they no longer exist in our lives. And so that can, again, create, like I said, this sense of psychological safety. I think that we have this lore in our culture that, well, you want to say everything before someone dies, or you're going to regret it. You're going to regret it. But think of how many times when someone's died suddenly, we didn't get to say anything. In some cases, when we don't, we grieve for a minute, we wonder for a minute. But like I said, as I was saying to someone else, time is on our side. And so, Brittany, this is where the rubber meets the road when we're dealing with enabling family members. Again, just that the same way enabling family members will pressure people. You'll be sorry if you don't forgive. Gonna tell you, I've worked with a lot of people who didn't forgive. They were not sorry. They're like, I'm actually fine with this. Some people will say, I committed to no contact, and I am grateful that I did, because my health improved because I've gone no contact. So Brittany, you know what that path is. And then you also have to ask yourself 2 other questions. How would I feel if I saw if I started having contact with my father again? What would that do to your mental and physical health? And then this is the harder part, Brittany, because your father is still living. Play it out. What would it feel like if your father passed tomorrow and you did not speak to him? I mean, it's hard to predict the future, but I think sometimes we have a pretty good handle on it. And you might think like, no, I would not care. I'm done. I was done a long time ago. He's still living. But for a lot of people who go no contact in narcissistic relationships, they'll say there was a mental death they experienced, like this person no longer existed for them. And that might be fine for you. The one thing, Brittany, that I don't want you to get lost in the sort of loop of is trying to prove your point to your family. Because I think this is where people sort of undo themselves. They'll say, this is why I'm not going to. Let me tell you why. They have an agenda. Family systems like to maintain the status quo. It's homeostasis, right? We like to keep things the way they are. Anyone who's healing from narcissistic abuse and making big calls in their lives, disengaging, going no contact, ending a relationship, sort of not communicating in the same way, you're definitely throwing something into the machine that wasn't there before. And the machine's not ready for it. And that's why those of you who are healing, you're already doing something ridiculously courageous, because you're sort of stepping away, right? You're stepping away from how things are usually done. So Brittany, it's absolutely crucial, whatever choice you make. And I do think at a juncture like this, if you're struggling with it, therapy becomes a really important tool. But also, in addition, is for you to recognize that the big sort of hole we sort of step into is when we try to prove or make a point or argue our point to our family members to say, these are the reasons. They aren't listening to your reasons. They have likely a different agenda. They may think they're even acting in your best interest. But Brittany, part of individuating, part of becoming autonomous, part of becoming our whole authentic separate selves, is that we also know, we feel it mentally, we feel it physically, we feel it in our minds, we know it, we feel it, it's in there. We know that this isn't going to work for me, but we don't feel the need to prove it. I know it makes it hard. So you can see, you're going to regret this, you're going to regret this. And I don't know what your relationship is with these family members, whether you like them and you don't want to just shut them down and say, I hear that, but this is what works for me. And if they go so far as to say, no, you don't know what works for you, well, now they're gaslighting you. So that's not okay. But if they hear that and say, oh, I hope you know what you're doing, and say, yeah, I've given this, I know what I need. So let's just leave it at that. Don't get into it with them. Because again, that maintenance of status quo in social systems can often supersede what's in the best interest of the individual people within the system. But none of this is easy. And Brittany, also, if for some reason, your father's illness, something like that, you get pulled back into contact with him, don't view it as a failure. Don't shame yourself, nothing. It's the natural course of things. And then also, should you get pulled in, and check in with yourself and say, whoa, that was not good for me. Well, that also gives you a piece of data. There are no mistakes in this process. The only mistakes come when we don't learn from the things we do and many times doubt how we feel. So I hope that helps. How do I find myself and what I like again? So Carrie, I love this question, because honestly, that's exactly what this book is about. So you'll be in great shape. And in fact, the reading guide we're providing to everyone for free gets at some real pointed questions on how to get at that, right? Because it really is sort of the fundamental question, right? Of philosophy and all that. Who am I? What am I about? What do I stand for? These kinds of basic questions can be so hard, because I think that for someone who survived one of these relationships, these questions become complicated because there's sort of two sets of answers. There's a set of answers of who am I? What am I about? What do I stand for? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I like? What don't I like? What do I want my life to look like? There's one set of answers to those questions that are truly ours. And there's another set of answers to those questions that we were told were ours. And so the more of these narcissistic relationships we've had in our lives, the more we were really led to believe that what I want is, I want to do this, I want to be that. I'm like, do I? So that your work right now, Carrie Ann, is to separate that sort of kind of entangled mess of the answers to those questions. Who am I? What am I about? What do I stand for? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I want my life to look like? And lay it all out. But then really sit with that. Writing it down is a great way to do it, and sit with it and say, which of these are mine and which of them are theirs? And this is a moment where anyone listening to this answer can reflect on, did you make decisions about long-term committed relationships or marriage on the basis of what other people wanted for you? Did you make decisions about career, what you do to earn a living in your adult life on the basis of what other people wanted for you? Look at what your life is now, Carrie Ann, and ask yourself what parts of it you want to be different, because you want them to be different because those are the things you really want. So it's very much almost like drawing this map of you and then seeing, well, how much of this is actually where I want to be? And listen, we can't all have exactly what we want, right? We can't live our lives exactly the way we want. Otherwise, I'd be waking up at 10 o'clock in the morning. But we can also say, like, that could be a wake-up call to someone. I always admire people who say, yeah, I know what I want my life to look like in terms of work, or in terms of retirement, or in terms of, as you get older, this gets a little bit easier, but it's always going to be hard somewhat if you've had if you've been through narcissistic relationships. And then Carrie Ann, it becomes a daily questioning of yourself. And so, there are so many ways, though, to do this sort of, and this is the meaning and purpose oriented work, that you have to think about, like, what makes me get out of bed in the morning? What gives me purpose in life? And listen, what might give you purpose in life is, some people say walking my dog is the time I get each day I get out of my house. And like, I don't love my job and other stuff in my life, but I love walking my dog. Then that gives you purpose. That's fine. Purpose doesn't have to be like I'm trying to split the atom or cure cancer or write the great American novel. Sometimes purpose is that I work to earn money so I can have a life that I enjoy. I like my pets. I like certain people in my life. I like some hobbies. So a life may not be, we don't always get to spend our time doing exactly the things we want, but we still hold space for them. That's a lot of this work, Carrie Ann. And like I said, I do hope you're getting the book, because there's a lot of great stuff in this, plus the reading guide, that can take this and help you make it very much yours. If you can grapple with some of these questions and think of it as a disentangling, that there's this big kind of knotted ball of how much of this is us and how much of this is them. And then in that painstaking way, unknotting it and figuring out which parts belong to you. Do we have any more questions? Great. How do we forgive? Oh, Evelyn, there you go. There's a question. How do we forgive? How do we forgive family members and work people? And most importantly, how do we forgive ourselves for allowing the abuse to go on for years, for ignoring our gut feelings? So let's start at the most important part of this question. You are not responsible for your abuse. You did not allow abuse to go on. You were in a relationship, you were in a system, and you were abused. Staying in something is not allowing abuse to happen. It happened. And even the language of allowing implies that you were somehow complicit in it. We have got to break through this languaging. You didn't allow anything to happen. It happened. Even that shift in language, Evelyn, I hope creates a shift in you, that none of us should be sitting there. I let this happen. I allowed this to happen. I didn't set the boundary. I didn't push back. When you're dealing with this level of psychological manipulation, someone you actually showed up and were compassionate towards, but they weren't playing with the same rule book. This isn't about allowing. This is about no one ever, we weren't given the roadmap for this, right? So how do we forgive? You don't have to forgive. You don't. What happens in a lot of these relationships, especially if it happens time and time and time and time again, and there's never an apology, there's never a making amends, there's never a taking of responsibility. Only you know if that's within your wheelhouse to forgive it. Because we know this, narcissistic people love being forgiven. They feel entitled to being forgiven. It's as though they're so much bigger and more important than everyone else that why should they have to face a consequence like not being forgiven? And once we forgive them, they receive that as permission to do it again because they know they're going to get forgiven again. And I've talked about this over and over, that the research has shown that forgiving people who repeatedly harm us is not good for us. Again, I have an entire section of the book called The Treachery of Forgiveness. Okay? So how do we? How do we forgive? We don't, you don't have to, let's start more basic. Decide whether you want to or not. You will heal if you don't forgive. You will heal if you do forgive. The key is that whether you forgive or don't forgive, that process is authentic. It's not a magic eraser. People sometimes think like, oh, so if I forgive this person, right? If I forgive them, then I will heal. Nope. In fact, forgiving can sometimes hold a person back. And some people will say, I'm not forgiving this. And then years down the road, you might say, they're out of my life. They're not affecting me to hell with it. And you might even say, is this even forgiveness? I think I feel indifferent towards them. I don't care. But you may still resent what they did. That's not forgiveness. So it's not so much about a how do we forgive. It's a whether you forgive. Saying the words, I forgive you, have no meaning unless you actually really do. And to forgive means you give up resentment. I know that the popular sort of positioning is you can't heal unless you forgive. Not true. Or if you have to, otherwise you're carrying this weight. No, you're not. You're actually remembering. Not forgiving means you often remember it accurately, saying, because to us, we also make the mistake, though. Forgiving doesn't also mean you're getting back into it. Some people say, I forgive you and I don't want anything to do with you. Remember, if you forgive a narcissistic person, they take that in as, oh, you forgive me, so we're back in it, right? You're like, no. I have to tell you, when you go up to a narcissistic person, you say, I forgive you and I'm done. They ain't buying that. They're like, no, you don't forgive me or you'd come back into the relationship. And that's the ultimate manipulation. Because you can forget, and some people will say, I'm only going to be able to forgive them if I get out of this. And if I get out of this and I'm not living in this psychological prison, sure, I can forgive them. But again, the definition of forgiveness is you've given up resentment. And that can take a really, really long time, which is why some people say, yeah, 15 years down the road, sure, I forgive them, right? Whatever. I don't even think about them anymore. If it's family, it's a lot harder. Okay. It's the same thing. Family members, work people, whomever. This is a personal journey, but a piece that's really important to remember. If you're at the place where you still don't forgive them, don't tell them that. A mistake a lot of people say is like, hey, you know what? I don't forgive you. I just want you to know that. And I don't have to forgive you. And I can heal even if I don't forgive you. Do not give that up. Because if you say you don't forgive, the vast majority of people are going to paint you out as a bad person, as a cold person. They might even call you a narcissistic person. It's not true. But we don't live in a world that's ready to hear it. A lot of people culturally, religiously, and otherwise were told you got to forgive or there's no moving forward. It's not the case in narcissistic relationships. It's sometimes the not forgiving that allows people to move forward. And then what you get someday, you might get to indifference. But so it's not a how, it's a do you. And then from there, if you really are genuinely forgiving this person because you truly don't resent it and you're aware that they're going to do the thing to you again and you still forgive them, then you just forgive them. But all that other stuff I'm talking about might be why it feels so difficult to do the how. So we have another question. Okay, so we have a question here. I'm raising a son who has a narcissistic father. I myself have a narcissistic father. I want to teach him how to respect others and not be narcissistic himself. And I want to provide him understanding and empathy, but how? Well, you're concerned about him and you're asking this question and you're learning about all this. So I'm guessing you do have empathy and understanding. So there's that piece. Number one, Jennifer, one thing, and this is everyone needs to know, this isn't just a Jennifer thing. This is an everyone thing. Do not ever tell your children that you think that their parent is narcissistic. It's a very, very unsettling, destabilizing thing to have happen. Okay. It's just not a good thing to hear. So let's just start with that piece because your kid may come to that on their own when they're older, late adolescents. They might read books, watch videos and say, hey, mom, do you think dad's narcissistic? And even then, don't take that bait and say, why are you asking me that question? It got to keep that voice under control. Like, what's making you ask me that? And they'll say, well, I read that this is a person who's this, and this, and that sounds like dad. And say, well, does it help you to have that framework? And they'll say, like, it says that it won't change. So it means, like, is that always going to be like this? And say, well, again, I'm going to ask you, does it help you to know that? And they're like, I guess, like, but do you see what I'm saying? It's about not saying, yep, he is. And that's why I left and this, that, and the other. Because your kid may be coming to you and they might feel even safer with you if they can explore these feelings. Again, I don't know how old your son is. You're saying, how do I raise him to be understanding and empathic? There's a lot of ways we can do this, right? Number one, and above all else, bring empathy to your child. When they're talking to you, be attuned to them. When they're sharing something with you, let them share it. If they're having a feeling, allow the feeling. Don't question the feeling. Say, there's no reason for you to be sad. We don't need a reason to be sad. If your child's sad, if your son's sad, then he's sad. And say, I'm here. You want to cry it out? You want me to give you a hug? Do you want to talk about it? Anything you want. Be what they're feeling. It's the most empathic thing that can happen to us as a human being is somebody just lets us have our feeling and doesn't tell us we could have another one or shouldn't be having the one we're having. So let your son have his feelings, especially for boys. It's so important because we often don't give them enough spaces to safely express emotions, especially vulnerable emotions. Let him have those experiences. Check in with him. How are you feeling? And ask that question and really wait to hear the answer. Allow him to be his own self, have his own feelings, his own choices. Let him have the experience of making choices, have that sense of autonomy and feel safe in that. Create an environment where he has a safe and secure attachment to you. I want to really stress this to any of you listening to this who are co-parenting with a narcissistic person. Either you're currently in a relationship or they're your ex. A child who has one secure attachment is good to go. I can't make promises that your child may not become narcissistic, your child may not develop issues. I can't make that promise. But when I say good to go, I think people think, my child has a narcissistic parent, they're doomed. Not at all. Having one safe, healthy, predictable, consistent, available, loving parent with whom the child feels psychologically safe is the ultimate protection for that child. So you can create that through all these things I'm saying: attunement and availability, and creating safe emotional space, and being present with his emotion, and not leaving your child feeling unsafe by speaking negatively about his dad, even though you're biting your tongue and clenching your fists and so want them to know it. If your son has a difficult encounter with his dad, don't jump in there and say, see, he's a bad guy, which I'm not saying you're doing this, Jennifer, by the way, but like, let them talk about it. Protect your child when you have to, but try not to have those big knockdown, drag out, like, I mean, when I mean knockdown, I mean psychologically knockdown fights in front of the child. That can also be destabilizing. And then whatever is age appropriate, there's other things we can also do. When they're younger, we read to them. When they get older, they read themselves, read the same books as them. But especially when they're young and we read to them, don't just close the book and go on to the next story, or just say, now it's time to go to sleep. Talk to them about how the characters are feeling. Like, maybe there's a sad bear, and say, how do you think the bear was feeling? Your kid will probably pick it up and say, bear was sad. And you're like, what do you think was going on? And they'll say, well, the other bears wouldn't play with him. And I go, that's hard, isn't it? Yeah. And they'll feel bad for bear. Let them feel sad for bear. Let them identify with bear's feelings. As time goes on, they'll be reading more complicated books. Like I said, you could read them alongside with them. Talk about feelings. If you watch TV or a movie with them, pick up on the emotional themes. Talk about them. Don't just passively consume this media. Make it a conversation. And then to sort of, jump ahead as they get older, to just keep doing that. Even as they do get older, you can still, at the end of a movie, you could turn it off and say, how's everyone feeling about that? Play games with them, especially when they're younger. Sometimes they're going to lose. Chutes and ladders works that way, right? It's not a game of skill. It's all about getting that big ladder at the beginning. But again, having kids, and I remember when I would win at Chutes and Ladders, one time my daughter got mad and she wanted to toss the board. And I said, slow down, sweetheart. I won and this feels good. And this is, I'm having, this is nice for me. And you'll win sometimes, and it wouldn't feel good if someone did this to you. It's why we teach kids how to win and how to lose, and they do the tap, tap, tap at the end of the game. But as our parents, we don't have to lose every game. It becomes a time for them to understand how to be self-aware and also to manage their emotions. So there's a lot of things you can do, Jennifer, depending on your child's age, but I'm hoping some of that gave you some framework and guidance. Do you have more questions? We have a question here. Can we still live the way we like and have a peaceful life even when we continue to live with a narcissistic person through radical acceptance, or will it really ruin us? Thank you, Marie Ann. Brilliant question. Whole chapter in the book on how to heal when we have to stay. So one piece I'm jumping on here is, can we have a peaceful life-ish? I think that really depends on what this narcissistic person around you is like. I'm going to assume that it's not malignant, severe. Maybe that's a wrong assumption. Can we live the way we like? It will be harder to do that, but it can be done. The key is, once you get to true door sealed all the way around, the light doesn't get in, radical acceptance, right? No more surprise. You know what you're dealing with. You do have to understand that grief is always going to be a fellow traveler, because there is that every so often that awareness of like, this is really my life, right? You see other people's relationships and it doesn't feel good. You have to really connect deeply with the why of your staying. Not because it's wrong, but because there might be times the grief will overwhelm you, and then you'll recontextualize that. I've known people who stayed, and I work with people from regions of the world where divorce is simply not an option. And they will say, like, it wasn't, but, and they'll say, I could not have, it would have been too difficult for me, my family, there would have been so much stigma, and there would have been so much shame and all of that. And so I don't regret staying, because it really sort of protected family members I genuinely love and have empathy for. And I found other ways to live more fully. So when we say live the way we like, those things that would have meaning and purpose to you, whatever they look like, there might be some restrictions on it depending on the narcissistic relationship you're in. The key is, if you are going to stay and you radically accept that you don't, sadly, you can't bring these things to the attention of the narcissistic person. This idea of I'm going to live the way I like is that you commit to the things that matter to you, whatever that looks like. Understand that there'll be sometimes be barriers in the way, but you continue to commit to that. But you never wait for the narcissistic person to sign off on it. They're never going to say, hey, good for you for doing the things that matter to you, right? We'll often sometimes feel like when we have to stay in a narcissistic relationship, we're doing things sort of secretively, right? We feel like we're sort of like sneaking cigarettes behind the house kind of thing. Like we're doing things in a very secretive way because we don't want them to find out, but these are important things to us. So that what you get to is like, will this ruin us? I don't think you necessarily have to be ruined if you stay in a narcissistic relationship. I think healing is a little bit bumpier when we have to stay for no other reason that you may continually be exposed to this noxious stimulus of the narcissistic person saying hurtful things or doing hurtful things or withholding themselves or not noticing you. It's crucial, Marie Ann, that you don't rely on them when it comes to big ticket stuff. Like, for example, when you're sick, the stuff I was talking with David Kessler about. But it's very crucial that whatever those daily practices look like, for some people, they might be spiritual, or some people, they might be hobbies. A big one, Marie, is that you build social relationships outside of this relationship. So you might have good friends. You might have people in a support group. You might have a great therapist, a combination of these things. You might have colleagues in a job. Those will be your go-to places. Like I said, it's never going to be perfectly as smooth and silky a road as maybe if you're out of it. But then some people will say you open yourself up to a new host of problems when you step away. I know healing absolutely happens when people stay in it. I even think you can thrive, but it is a lot of daily calibration around the extent of the radical acceptance and ensuring that you've created this rich life for yourself that you actually don't share with the narcissistic person. Because if you do, then it'll just be one more thing that they can dismantle. And take a couple more questions. Why not? We're on a roll. We'll go a little bit longer. So we have a question here. How do you know when someone newish is safe to trust after getting out of a narcissistic person's grip? So this is a really important question, because this is probably one of the things that survivors struggle with the most, which is, how do I trust again? When it may not even be what you experienced in a narcissistic relationship was a traditional betrayal, like they cheated on you, or they lied in some big way, or they financially, abused you, or something like that, right? That it can even be the small, like the death by 1,000 cuts sort of betrayals, because you stop trusting yourself. How do you know when someone newish is safe to trust? It's got to be a gradual process. The best way to get to trust someone is you build up an accumulation of trusted experiences. They show up when they say they're going to show up. They watch how they even talk about other people. Do they feel like they're sharing secrets of other people? Because if they're doing a lot of secret sharing about other people, they may actually do that to you someday. So you might want to watch yourself there. For anyone who's ever been through a narcissistic relationship, trust is a slow burn. You're not going to go all the way in. And if the new person says, well, I'm not that person from your past, why can't you just trust me? May not be your person, because it's going to take a minute. If the person really pushes it, well, I'm not that person, so hurry up and trust. There's no such thing as hurry up and trust. And that might be a time you step away. But you're looking for an accumulation of experience. You're moving slowly. You're paying attention. If something happens where you feel a little less comfortable, you may communicate about it or step back. Remember what I always talk about, that 12-month cleanse, as it were, right? That 12-month giving yourself, if you're talking about intimate relationships, if you've been in a narcissistic, romantic, intimate, call it what you will, relationship that's lasted a year or longer, my hope for you is you take a full year off. And why? Because it takes that much time to come back into yourself, back into your body, know who you are. Going back to that question someone had asked before, I think it was Carrie Ann, about how do I know who I am? How do I, what I'm about? It takes a minute, more than a minute. It takes at least a year to do that. People say, well, I've been lonely in this for so long and I have to be alone more. And you might have felt lonely, but now it's learning to be alone. Right? It's the power you find in sort of knowing, like, oh, this is how I like the thermostat. Oh, this is like what I like to eat. Oh, I did want to get this kind of a pet. You allow yourself to live in a way that feels right to you, because then you start to know those things about yourself. So when you meet someone new who tries to dismantle those things about yourself, you're already in possession of them to say, I'm like, no, this is not where this is. No, I'm not saying being stubborn and say the thermostat must stay at 75, but you might say like, no, I prefer being in a warm house or whatever it is. Right. So the process of trust is a slow one. A lot of people, especially when they first come out, even if they take that year, will say, it's taking me longer. I feel slower at this. And, to which I say, that means you are healing, because it means you're being more discerning. Big thing to talk about in the book is this concept of discernment. Discernment is everything. If you're going to pay so much careful attention to what you eat and what you wear and all of that, it's also, we have to discern how we let people into our lives. Trust will come back. Will it ever come back in that 100% big, shaggy, friendly dog, I trust you way? No. What narcissistic relationships do to us is that they always keep us a little more on edge. I had a conversation like this with my team today about an email we got, like, no, I don't trust. And we were right. It was not an email to be trusted. So there's a little bit of a, I don't know, I'm going to call it those street smarts, psychological street smarts you get. Doesn't mean you'll never trust again, but your trust will be tempered. And here's what I care about more. I care less about you trusting other people, healing. It's about you trusting yourself. So, folks, we're going to do it. I'm going to go to sleep. And here's what I'm going to promise you too. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a few more lives just to keep people on the same page with this raffle and our giveaways and close this up. And then I promise you, I will not put you through any more lives for a while. I'm actually going to take a big, long sleep for a little while. And then I'm also going to get some other stuff in my life going back online. But I promise you no more lives. All right. So in exchange for that, I am going to remind you, we have the raffle. That's sort of a new kind of like this at the end. Like, at the end, there's always got to be like, how like at the end of a movie, you're like, oh, what a surprise that is. So remember, if you have already ordered a book or bought the book or have the book and you already filled out our verification form, you're like, that's all I want. Great. You're already entered in the raffle. What are you going to win? Tea with Dr. Ramani, tea with me, I guess. And it's not tea, like not drop the tea, gossip tea. I mean, like literally drink a little bit of tea because that's my preferred beverage. And it's not, like I said, it's not therapy or anything like that. Please don't think that. It's really just like a chat. And you meet with me and you might ask me specific questions. Think of the questions we asked today and imagine for anyone whose questions today, honestly, if I'd gotten to ask you more questions, like tell me a little bit about what the relationship you're asking me about is, and I could learned a little bit more, I might have been able to give, for example, Evelyn more pointed guidance on something like forgiveness if I'd known more. So that's what I love talking with survivors, but I have to be honest, we've never done something like this before. Probably won't do it again just because time constraints means that this is tough. I only do consultations every so often. So this will be something to build in, and just sort of felt like, let's give this book the launch it deserves and the incredible support. Wish I could do it with everyone. I have to live to be 500 years old, but because I know a lot of people won't have these conversations, or I wish I had an army of people, which we're building to send people to. But in the interim, if you buy the book, and like I said, you want more entries, buy a few more copies, give them away as gifts. Heck, you know what? If you have a local nonprofit agency, you're like, I'd love to give this to this, women's program or women's shelter. I want to give this away to someone. Buy some of those copies, give those away. You'll get more entries into the raffle. Fill out that pre-order verification. And then, like I said, 20 of you are going to win that Tea with Me Zoom conversation. It's virtual. It's absolutely not in person. It's virtual. Anyone from around the world can win. You just need Wi-Fi. And those aren't the only prizes. We are going to be, some of you are going to win these. You may not get the conversation, but some of you are going to win these fabulous gift boxes with all the anti-narcissism swag. And some of you are going to get signed books. And if you're one of the winners of the signed books, you tell us who you want that book signed to. It might be you, it might be someone dear to you, but it won't just be a signed book. It'll be a book with an actual inscription in it signed to you. So please enter the raffle. My team's given you details on how to fill that verification form. And as I said, if you've already filled out the verification, you're already entered in the raffle. If you want more entries, each one of these books is basically a raffle ticket. Okay. This is until 6 p.m. Pacific tomorrow. That's when it ends, because we're going to need time to sift through all of this data. This team has been working day and night on this. Okay. So you get all the other goodies too. If all the other stuff, the free attendance at the retreat, the free gaslighting court, all that you got if you verified, right? And so if you buy and verify, we'll make sure you've got that. But if you want to enter the raffle, you also have to verify. And as I said, that's just whoever wins wins. Not everyone can win. That's the nature of a raffle, unfortunately. But so my team has been great. They're going to answer your questions. Hopefully they've been answering your questions all along. And we might get lucky. And who knows, some of you listening, you might get to have tea with me. We'll have a nice little chat here in Zoom in my little corner of the world. So thank you again. I hope you found this program with David Kessler to be helpful. Please, if you have questions, my team has put that up there. When I tell you this team, 3 remarkable women have been working almost around the clock for weeks now to get all of this done. And it has been, I mean, I'm awestruck at their stamina. This is my book, this is my baby, but they've really stepped up, and we are a tiny, gritty little team, but really they will get to your emails. Again, around the clock, they've been working on this. And so join us. Like, this is it. We're closing it up tomorrow around 5 p.m. Pacific or so. That'll be the end of the lives, and you will not have to deal with that notification. This one's going live again, really? We just wanted to give this book the send off. I can't say it took 3 years to write this book. It took about 20 years to write this book. So here it is. Let's give it. It's send it into the world. I want to make this as fun and interesting. And again, I hope you I hope you enjoy it when you read it. And I hope you win. So thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I will see you tomorrow. I'm going to have a few lives tomorrow. And then, like I said, I will be done for a while. Thank you again. Order the book. Bye.